Step quietly. The night is only just loosening its grip on the castle walls. Beyond the moat, the wooden drawbridge groans as it settles into place. Somewhere in the distance, sheep bleat faintly in the damp fields. Above you, banners ripple in the morning wind, their fabric snapping softly against the sky's first pale light. Step quietly. Torchlight flickers against stone, casting wavering shadows that seem to breathe across the battlements. The air is sharp and cool, filling your lungs with a freshness that makes each breath feel alive. For a moment, the world outside is vast and open. But ahead, the heavy wooden doors of the castle invite you inward. The moment you cross their threshold, the air changes. The freshness is gone, replaced with the cool weight of stone. Your footsteps echo, slow and deliberate, across flagstones worn by centuries of feet. Inside, the stillness is different. The walls hold sound in their embrace. Every creak of timber, every drip of unseen water seems amplified. You are no longer in the wide world of fields and sky, but in a self-contained universe, a fortress, both protection and prison. And deep within this fortress, hidden from noble eyes, lies the space we will enter tonight. Step quietly. We are not here to linger in chambers where lords receive guests. We are not here to marvel at tapestries or to stand in the grand hall. Instead, we turn toward the heartbeat of survival, the part of the castle that keeps every other part alive. The kitchen. The kitchen is not alone in its work. Across the castle grounds, scattered in separate outbuildings, other hidden workers are already awake. In the bakehouse, the first loaves are being shaped and placed near flames. In the brewhouse, small ale, safer than water, is being stirred in great vats. In the buttery barrels are checked, measured, and prepared. In the stables, milk is collected, eggs are gathered, and dung is swept away. The noble family, their retainers, their guards and guests, all will rely on these quiet, unseen hands. The castle may be defined by its walls and towers, its banners and its lord, but its lifeblood is carried in buckets of water, kneaded into loaves of bread, and stirred into pots of stew. This is the rhythm of the household, repeated each day, season after season. Step quietly, for above these spaces, in the high chambers, the atmosphere is entirely different. There, silence reigns. Floors are polished. Curtains are drawn. Rooms wait in quiet dignity for the noble family to rise. Nothing stirs, except perhaps the crackle of a guarded fire in the hearth. The air smells faintly of wax and clean rushes. But below stairs, the rhythm has already begun. It is a restless world of sound and movement. The clatter of wooden pails, the scrape of knives on boards, the shuffle of feet across worn stone. Voices murmur in low tones, blending with the crackle of firewood and the groan of opening doors. Here, there is no silence, only constant preparation. Step quietly. Slip down the narrow staircases that twist into shadow. The stone grows cooler against your hands. The air grows heavier, touched with the scent of smoke. Each step carries you deeper, away from polished chambers, and closer to the restless hum of labor. Imagine yourself in this world. Imagine the rhythm of daily work, unending, steady as a heartbeat. Buckets carried, fires stoked, knives chopping, doors opening and closing. And so we will begin there, in the kitchen of the medieval castle, the hidden stomach of the fortress, where life is sustained not by feasting, but by endless, ordinary toil. Step quietly now, and let the morning unfold before your eyes, for it is still early. So early that the sun has barely thought of climbing over the cold horizon. And the castle rests in a breath between night and day, but already down in the depths. In the stone-veined chambers of the kitchen, the rhythm of daily labor has begun. Quiet at first, like a pulse awakening after sleep. And you must imagine yourself standing in the chill air outside, feeling the damp mist still clinging to the fields, hearing faintly the bleating of sheep far below the walls, the shuffle of hooves as oxen stir, the creak of wooden carts being readied for the day, while closer to you, the heavy groan of the drawbridge descending over its chains echoes against the water. The slow grinding wood reminding you that life here is never truly silent, and above, the banners stir restlessly in a cold wind that snaps them into brief life before they fall limp again. Colored cloth brushing the first suggestion of dawn's light, and in that moment you feel the thinness of the air, the crispness that cools your breath so that each exhale hovers like smoke, vanishing in the dim half-light. And now step quietly once more, for you must cross the threshold. You must leave behind the open chill and enter the stone belly of the castle. And as you pass within you, notice how instantly the air changes, how the freshness of the outside dissolves into something heavier, tinged with ash and old wood smoke. The faint, lingering odor of grease from yesterday's meals, and as your boots strike the flagstones, their echo is different from the soft crunch of earth, each step hollow. Each step reminding you that these walls are thick and enduring, carved from centuries of labor. And inside, you are no longer part of the sky, but part of the enclosed heartbeat of the household. And still, you step quietly down the sloping staircases, the air growing warmer the deeper you descend, though it remains dim. The only light, at first the flickering orange of torches, flames that hiss against the dampness of stone. And now you hear the first movements of the kitchen's waking day, a faint shuffling, a distant clatter, the sound of water being poured into heavy iron, the rhythm of a broom dragging against the floor, all of it subdued, not yet chaos. But already you sense the great storm that will follow as the day unfolds. Here at dawn, the work is humble, slow, deliberate, but it is relentless, and the first of the tasks is always the same as it has been for countless mornings: hauling water-heavy buckets. Drawn up from the well, the rope creaking, the pulley groaning, the splash as each bucket tips over into the next container. And then the staggering weight as the servants, often girls not yet grown, or men already worn, carry the sloshing burdens down into the kitchen depths, their arms trembling, shoulders stooped, backs aching, though the day has only just begun, and the water is not for drinking, but for survival, to fill the great cauldrons, to wash the endless stream of pots and knives, to mix with flour, to temper the heat, for without water the kitchen is nothing. And so this task repeats endlessly, again and again, each bucket heavier than the last, the cold biting into raw fingers, the metal handle digging grooves into the skin. And you must imagine yourself carrying one, feeling the water slop over the edge onto your shoes, feeling how the bucket swings and jars against your thigh, and still you step quietly, for there is no pause, no chance to rest. The sun has not yet risen, and already the labor has bent you to its will. Beyond the hauling of water comes the fire, the true breath of the kitchen, for without fire nothing lives. And so, before any loaf can rise, before any pot can boil, the hearths must be kindled, and this too is a ritual of fatigue, scraping the ashes of yesterday's flames, the white powder coating fingers, stinging eyes, and then stacking logs, splitting kindling, coaxing spark to ember with wheezing lungs, a rhythm of blowing, of praying that the damp wood catches, that the smoke does not choke the chamber before flame takes root, and when at last it does, the flames leap with a sudden hunger, licking the blackened stone, casting a glow that flickers across faces still drawn with sleep, and the heat begins to push back the chill of dawn, though it also announces the beginning of toil, for now the pots can be hung, now the bread can begin, and the small reprieve of night is ended, replaced by the ceaseless energy of work. And you step quietly into that glow, into that warmth, knowing it will soon grow oppressive, suffocating. But in this first moment, it is still a comfort, the fire's breath, a fragile promise of life in the dim heart of stone. Then comes the grinding of flour, a sound as old as civilization, the heavy circular motion of the cornstone, one hand pushing endlessly, the other steadying the grain, each kernel crushed into dust, the motion repeated until muscles ache, until arms burn, and you must imagine that monotony, the way the rhythm numbs the mind. Each turn of the stone, like a heartbeat, slow, insistent, wearing down not just the grain, but the body of the one who turns it. And yet it cannot cease, for bread is the foundation of life here. Bread for servants, bread for lords, bread for travelers at the gate. And so the grain is ground, the flour sieved, the dough kneaded with fingers that press and fold and press again, palms sticky, wrists strained, until the mass is pliable, alive with the yeast that will make it rise, though slowly. For the kitchens begin their day before the sky has lifted its veil, and by the time the sun is visible, the first loaves are already swelling in their pans, ready for the oven. And so you step quietly past the bakers, their faces flour-dusted, their hair damp with sweat despite the cold, their voices low as they work in silence. For this is not the grand hall with its noise and laughter. This is the labor that sustains all else, invisible, repetitive, and yet essential. And still the rhythm continues. Imagine now the castle above, the noble chambers still cloaked in silence, the lords and ladies dreaming in feather beds, unaware of the bodies already bent in toil below. And imagine how the contrast grows sharper with each passing minute. The high walls glowing softly with the new dawn, while the kitchens remain shadowed and smoky, their air thick with the scents of ash and flour, their stones slick with damp, their corridors echoing with muffled sounds of effort. And always you are stepping quietly, watching the morning unfold, not through sunlight, but through labor. Each task a chain that links the next, a rhythm that allows no escape. And this is the dawn rhythm, relentless, humble, and unseen, the heartbeat of the castle that begins long before its masters stir. Now, as the day tips into its loud heart and the kitchen becomes less a room than a weather system, imagine yourself moving slowly through it, not to command the scene, but to witness it, to feel how every small action attaches to the next like links of chain, how the rhythm of daily labor swells into something steady and encompassing, and how the senses, layered and relayered, become the map that keeps you oriented in this human storm. Begin with smell, because smell arrives first, always like a herald that can pass through walls, and you notice the remembered damp of straw tucked beneath baskets and near the threshold where shoes leave wet impressions. the faint green cut of parsley bruised beneath the heel of a palm, and sage leaves torn into ribbons that release a soft, resinous breath. And beneath these bright notes, a quieter bass line, the sour temps of ale, exhaled from open jugs and sloshed across trestles. The malted warmth rising from the brewhouse through a half-open door. The way yeast seems almost alive in the air, a living haze that settles on the tongue. Next, the sounds collect themselves. They never come alone. They come in clumps and currents. Crackling firewood, talking to itself in dry consonants, pops and hisses as fat finds a coal. The bellows answering in long, emphatic sighs that push air into the hearths and stoke embers into urgent flame, while the shuffle of wooden shoes moves on its own grid. A soft percussion across the greasy flagstones, a sliding protective gait learned by bodies that know the floor is treacherous and the hands are full. Listen further, and you will hear the knives parsing the day into pieces, a quick patter as onions are diced, a duller rhythm when roots meet the blade, a rare but resonant thud when a cleaver finds the joint it seeks. Restrained, never ferocious, controlled by habit and by rule. And underneath all of it, steady as a drum too large to see, the low, constant murmur of voices, names called, measures agreed upon, the ancestral grammar of the kitchen repeated without flourish. More salt, less heat, hold that tray, mind the door, the pot is catching. Taste this, taste again, is it ready yet? Not yet, almost, now. Touch rouses next, because your palms cannot help but report what they meet. Rough wooden spoons, carved by hands that left their intention in every ridge, edges worn glossy by years of stirring. And between those edges and your fingers sits dough that clings and tethers you to the bench. A small, elastic resistance that says, not yet. Fold again, press again, turn again, while the skin of your wrist grows dusted in flour that finds the damp and clings like a second sleeve. Step forward, and the floor answers with a warning. A gentle slide beneath the foot where fat has settled. A cool patch of stone that remembers water. A grit of salt and ash that telegraphs each shift in weight. And so your stride becomes smaller, careful, a choreography of safety learned over countless noons. And through it all, the visuals do not stand still. They shimmer, because torchlight does. Not paint it flickers, it gives and takes in small breaths, and on the blackened walls, the wavering orange writes. Quick stories that vanish as soon as they are told here. A forearm arcs with a ladle there, a face leans toward a pot to read the steam. Over there, a rack of iron spits rotates with a dignity that comes only from balance and patience, the meat turning the glaze, settling the fat, mapping bright paths down to the coals. Now the work itself begins to organize in your mind, not as chaos, but as a lattice, each station nested in the next. The roasting hearth sings the high, sweet whistle of heat moving through narrow spaces. The stew corner keeps a lower register, a thoughtful bubbling that suggests time as an ingredient. While at the bread table, the air stays marginally cooler. The dough's chill should not be bullied away, and nearby a boy works the bellows, with intervals learned from the head cook's glance alone. 3 slow pushes, then rest, 3 slow pushes, then rest, and at each pause the fire speaks back with a language of sparks. The hours are measured without clocks, in dozens of little inventions, and onion candle that burns down to a mark. A ladle's shadow, sliding along a particular stone, seemed the behavior of a syrup, as it sheets from a spoon. These are the timepieces of the room and keeping. Them requires a soft attentiveness that is neither hurried nor lax. It is the cultivated middle that good kitchens live within. Smell returns, as it must, and when it does, it brings history with it. The parsley is now submerged in broth, and has softened the sage, has wedded itself to fat and become rounded, and that faint sourness of ale has migrated from jug to trencher, from floor to air to throat. A reminder that water is not trusted, and so small beer steadies the day, and that, too, is part of the calculus of labor. Because what is cooked matters less than how it keeps bodies upright through a winter or through the heavy heat of summer, and sounds return. Because listening is a form of timing. The distant clack of a door tells you the buttery has released 2 boys with jugs. The rolling rumble declares a cask set into motion. The bellows deepens when new oak is fed to the hearth. And in a far angle, a pestle keeps meeting a mortar in patient coughs, seeds being shattered into spice. And each sound plugs into a long, low hum that says the household is eating soon and must not be kept waiting. Textures return. A silkiness you can feel under the knuckles, a sign the gluten's web is woven and viable. And that rough wooden spoon meets a sauce that has found its thickening and now coats. The grain of the spoon with a glossy film and the slippery floor meets the soul again. But the body has learned a path of 3 safer stones, a tiny geography sketched by instinct and repetition. So the mountain of risk shrinks enough that speed can rise by a notch without courting disaster. And the light returns with adjustments that mark the sun's climb tiny shafts of day, find the narrow windows, and braid themselves with torchlight in lattice that move across the room. A slow migration of brightness that allows you to see, for a moment, the fine soot that powders the ceiling, and the invisible breath of the hearth become visible as it bends around heat, and in that moment the walls themselves seem to exhale, pause within the flow, and look at the organization. Because analysis here is not an academic exercise, but a survival skill. Provisioning dictates the menu, and the menu dictates the motion. And so barrels labeled for fish days sit open though no fish is present. Because it is Friday, and the cook's mind organizes by the rule before the ingredient, and over there, the larder with its salt-hung joints is consulted like a ledger, not for delicacy today, but for endurance next week. And you trace that endurance upstream to a steward who counts not by appetite, but by season. Autumn set aside nearly everything for winter. Spring offers greens that lighten stews. Summer demands more ale because the heat will ask it, and each of those choices lands here, on these boards, in these bowls, in these embers, and not one of them is visible to the guests who will sit above and marvel at abundance without seeing its arithmetic. The chain of rolls is visible in the posture of bodies. Then let us step slowly, very slowly, into the layered world of the medieval castle kitchen. A world that at first glance seems like nothing more than a smoky room of fire, meat, and clattering pots, but on closer inspection reveals itself to be a microcosm of the entire feudal order. A place where authority, invisibility, drudgery, and prestige all existed side by side. A place where your position in the hierarchy was written not in noble titles or coats of arms, but in grease-stained aprons, blistered hands, the weight of soot in your lungs, and the silent knowledge of whether you obeyed without question when a master cook's sharp command cut through the air. And to understand this, we must descend into that rhythm and see, with meditative patience, how each role within the kitchen, from the lowest scullion to the head cook himself, formed part of a chain as rigid and as unforgiving as the iron spit rods glowing near the hearth. Because, in truth, a medieval kitchen was not merely a room where food was prepared, but a theater of human order where every movement echoed the larger stratification of the castle itself. And so let us begin at the bottom, with the scullion, the lowest of the low, the one you would notice least because he was always on his knees, hands plunged into greasy water, scraping hardened fat from cauldrons, scrubbing endlessly at pewter plates with handfuls of sand, bending his back until it ached under the repetitive weight of work that never ended. And if you imagine yourself in his place, you feel the damp stone floor seeping its cold through your thin shoes. You smell the sour reek of water reused too many times. You hear the constant scrape of wood against metal, the splashing of slop pails, and above you the voices of others who do not bend so low. And so the scullion lived unseen, nameless, and yet indispensable. For without his constant scraping and scouring, the kitchen would collapse under its own filth. And so, though he was invisible, he was also the silent foundation of the entire culinary order. And then, slightly higher, though still bound to the ceaseless monotony of movement, was the spitboy, often a child, perhaps no more than 10 years old, tasked with turning the great iron spits that held entire carcasses of meat, oxen or boars. And here his world was one of unbearable heat, the fire roaring at his face until his skin reddened and blistered, the repetitive motion of turning the handle hour after hour until his arm ached with dull fire, and yet he could not pause. For if the meat burned on one side or remained raw on the other, it was his failure, his punishment, and the shame would be his alone. And so imagine yourself here, step quietly into his shoes, feel the sweat dripping from your brow into your eyes, feel the sting of smoke in your lungs, taste the salt of your own sweat as it drips to your lips, and know that your existence is one of mechanical repetition, a turning and turning that mirrors the endless cycles of work that define every servant's life. And yet, above you, in both rank and perception, stood the cooks, men of skill, often trained, sometimes possessing knowledge passed through guilds, men who could command ingredients with a mastery that made them both respected and feared. For the cook was not merely a laborer, but a craftsman, a conjurer of sustenance, and in great castles his authority could rival that of knights. For the master cook determined what the lord ate, and in a world where food was survival, such control was power. And you must see how the cook's role was paradoxical. He stood at the hearth, surrounded by heat and clamor, but unlike the silent scullion, his voice carried, his decisions were obeyed, his authority absolute within those smoky walls. And if you were to step quietly beside him, you would feel a shift in the air, hear the edge in his tone as he ordered salt, brought herbs, crushed, pots stirred, hear the scurry of lower servants rushing to please him. And so his presence was like a small lordship beneath the great lord himself. And when we step back and look carefully, we see how this hierarchy within the kitchen mirrors the hierarchy beyond its doors. The scullion, unseen yet foundational, resembles the peasant in the field whose work sustains all. The spitboy, caught in the fire and bearing its pain, is like the foot soldier, enduring hardship without glory. The cook is the knight of this world, a man of skill and authority, commanding the labor of others. And above him, the master cook, who, in some households, held a place of near equal respect to chamberlains and stewards. His knowledge of supply and season, of feast and fast, giving him influence over both the daily rhythm and the grand spectacle of noble life. And so the kitchen is revealed not as a place of simple drudgery, but as a mirror of the castle itself. A hierarchy within a hierarchy, a stage where power and invisibility play out in the glow of firelight. And yet, if you return to the scullion again in your mind, step quietly, imagine yourself once more kneeling in that corner, your hands raw from lye and sand, your eyes half closed with exhaustion. You realize that the hierarchy was not just about authority, but about presence and absence, about who was seen and who was unseen, who moved in silence and who spoke commands. And this too was part of the rhythm of medieval life, that some were destined to labor in obscurity, while others stood where the smoke parted and voices carried, and yet all were bound to the same rhythm, the same daily labor that made survival possible. And in this way the kitchen was both oppressive and sustaining, cruel and vital, invisible yet indispensable. And to think carefully of this is to understand not only the medieval meal, but the medieval mind. For in their world, hierarchy was not questioned but assumed, written into every action, every scrape of a pot, every turn of a spit, every barked command, every silent submission. And so to linger here, to immerse yourself in the sensory details, the crackle of logs, the glint of torchlight on greasy walls, the acrid smell of ale spilled on stone, the stickiness of dough under tired fingers, is to fall deeper into their rhythm, deeper into the meditative cadence of work that knew no end. A rhythm that will carry us onward as we continue this long descent into the hidden lives of those who kept the castle alive. Then let us turn our slow gaze toward the living conditions of the servants, those who labored in the shadows of the castle, yet rarely found themselves described in the great chronicles. For while knights, lords, and ladies were immortalized in ink, the servants existed in the margins, in the grease stains, in the footprints across stone floors, in the quiet dormitories, tucked away in corners where no visitor would ever wander. And it is here, in these hidden spaces, that we must pause and linger and look carefully, for the conditions in which they lived tell us not only about their daily survival, but also about the structure of medieval society itself, a world that defined itself by divisions of class and visibility. And so imagine, with deliberate patience, the chambers where they slept, not grand chambers hung with tapestries or warmed by braziers, but bare, drafty dormitory-style rooms, perhaps in the attic above the kitchen, or tucked against the outer wall of the castle, where the wind whistled through gaps in the stone. And here, row upon row of rough pallets lined the floor, each little more than straw, bundled into a sack of coarse cloth, the straw dampening quickly in winter, breeding lice and fleas. And if you step quietly into this chamber in your mind, you feel the chill settling into your bones. You smell the must of old straw mingled with the faint tang of smoke drifting up from the kitchens below. You hear the soft coughing of servants curled beneath thin wool blankets, the rustle of tired bodies shifting restlessly after a day of endless labor. And here, in this space, privacy was unknown, for you slept elbow to elbow with others, your breath mingling in the cold night air, your snores and mutterings part of the collective soundscape of exhaustion. And so, just as the hierarchy of the kitchen marked you by task, the dormitory marked you by rank as well. For lower servants, such as scullions and spitboys, slept in the least comfortable spaces, sometimes even directly on the kitchen floor itself, near the dying warmth of embers, curled against the stone like cats seeking heat, while higher-ranking servants, perhaps cooks or clerks, might be granted chambers of their own, small, bare, but separate, a measure of distinction within a world that prized visible order even in rest. And when morning came, you would rise with stiff joints, the imprint of straw still itching your skin, the chill lingering in your lungs, and immediately the rhythm of labor began anew, for, in truth, sleep was not a comfort but an interlude between one cycle of work and the next. And then we turn, still slowly, toward their food, and here too we see the stark contrast between servant and master. For while the Lord dined on venison, fresh bread, and wine, the servant's meal was meager, functional, sustaining only enough to keep the body moving, and so their diet consisted largely of stale bread. Bread baked days before and hardened until it could only be chewed with effort or softened by dipping it into small beer. That weak ale brewed not for pleasure but for necessity, for water was often unsafe to drink, and so this thin, sour liquid became the staple of survival, drunk morning and night, the faint bitterness lingering on the tongue, the slight fizz felt in the stomach, and alongside bread and beer there might be scraps left from the noble meal bones, stripped of their best flesh vegetable ends, fragments of cheese rind, all gathered into stews that simmered in the servants' pots, filling the air with a scent that was less rich than the Lord's feast, yet comforting in its own way, a reminder that hunger could at least be quieted, if never fully satisfied. And imagine yourself here, seated on a bench in the servants' hall, chewing bread that scratches your mouth, swallowing beer that tastes faintly of iron, listening to the scrape of spoons against wooden bowls, the murmur of tired conversation, the occasional burst of laughter rising despite the fatigue, for, even in deprivation, the servants carved out moments of fellowship. Their meals, brief respites, where the boundaries of rank softened slightly, though never entirely, for higher servants might eat nearer the fire, while lower ones remained at the edge. And so, even in bread and beer, hierarchy revealed itself, a constant thread woven into every detail of life. And now, with quiet care, let us consider their clothing. For in garments too we read the truth of their station, and the servants' clothes were not finery, not silks or velvets, but coarse wool tunics, spun from rough fibers that scratched against the skin, dyed in dull browns or grays that showed every stain. And over these tunics they wore aprons, heavy and stiffened with the grease of countless meals, fabric so soaked with fat that it could stand almost rigid. And here again the sensory world reveals itself. The smell of rancid grease clinging to the fibers, the stiffness of cloth that resisted bending, the perpetual damp from steam rising in the kitchens. And if you run your hand along such a tunic in your imagination, you feel its abrasiveness, its weight, its unyielding presence against your body. And these clothes were not changed often, for linen was expensive, washing arduous, and so the fabric absorbed the story of each day's labor, layering smoke, sweat, and grease into a permanent record, until the very smell of a servant's clothing marked them before their face was even seen. And yet these garments were functional, protective, designed to withstand toil. And so while the Lord's silks declared beauty and power, the servant's wool declared endurance, the ability to suffer heat, grease, and wear without surrender. And thus, in the silent language of fabric, the hierarchy spoke once more. When you gather these fragments together, the dormitory pallet, the crust of stale bread, the coarse tunic stiff with greasy you begin to see how the servant's existence was bound within narrow limits, how every detail of their daily life reflected not personal choice but structural necessity, how the castle itself became both workplace and prison, providing shelter yet denying comfort, offering food yet withholding abundance, granting clothing yet only in the roughest form. And this rhythm of deprivation and endurance formed the silent background of medieval life, unseen in chronicles, yet essential to the survival of the castle household. For without the labor of those who lived in such conditions, the feasts would not be served, the fires would not be lit, the nobles would not dine in splendor. And so once again we are reminded that invisibility is not the same as insignificance, that in the cold dormitory and the greasy apron lay the true foundation of the medieval feast. And if we lean still closer, if we allow ourselves to listen not only to the unending rhythm of labor, but also to the rare and fleeting moments when that rhythm shifted, when monotony was pierced by an unexpected sweetness, then we find ourselves among the servants in their moments of relief or celebration, those brief intervals when existence, though still bound to duty, took on a different hue. For while the ordinary days were marked by exhaustion, grease, and the relentless call of hierarchy, there were times when the great hall above swelled with festivity, when the noble household prepared for a feast. And though to the servants such occasions meant more work, more chaos, more hours bent over fire and cauldron, still they brought with them the promise of fragment scraps of roasted meat, the heel of a sweet pastry, a sip of wine poured too generously and cascading down to where it did not belong. And so, while the feast demanded endless exertion, it also whispered the possibility of indulgence, of tasting for a moment what normally remained forbidden. And thus celebration became paradoxical, both burden and gift, both exhaustion and reward, both the tightening of duty and the loosening of hunger's grip. And so imagine yourself standing in the kitchen on such a day, the air swollen with the smell of roasting venison, the glaze of honey dripping over spiced pastries, the thick, sweet steam of stewed fruits. And though you are weary from carrying platters, from tending spits, from lifting cauldrons heavy enough to bow your shoulders, still your nostrils fill with scents, unlike the daily bread and small beer, and your tongue salivates with anticipation, for you know that at the end of the night, when the lords and ladies have finished their feasting, when their laughter and music subside, when their plates are gathered, there will remain fragments left upon trenchers, crusts softened with meat juices, sugared almonds fallen to the rushes. And it is in these remnants that you, the servant, find your feast, kneeling on stone, fingers brushing crumbs, your body savoring luxuries not intended for you, yet tasted nonetheless. And in that taste you find not equality, but a brief communion with the distant world of nobility, a communion tasted not through invitation, but through residue. And yet how sweet it is, how unforgettable, that morsel of meat melting in your mouth after months of stale bread, that hint of sugar igniting your tongue in a way that lingers long after the hall grows dark. But let us not forget the soundscape of such moments, for in the ordinary rhythm of the servants' world the dominant sounds were the clang of pots, the crackle of fire, the shuffle of shoes, the mutter of orders and responses. Yet during feast days another layer drifted faintly down through the stone walls. Music, distant, muffled, transformed by the architecture into a ghostly echo. And if you close your eyes, you can hear it now, the thin strains of a lute plucked in rhythm, the rise and fall of voices singing in harmony, the rhythmic beat of a drum that seems to reverberate faintly in your chest. And though you are not in the hall, though you are not permitted to see the minstrels or the dancers, still the sound reaches you. And in reaching you, it transforms the kitchen into a liminal space, a place suspended between labor and dream, where your body continues its work, but your mind wanders upward, imagining the glitter of torchlight on golden goblets, the swish of silken gowns across rushes, the laughter of those who live lives you will never taste in full, and yet, even in their distance, the music gives you something, a rhythm to pace your movements, a reminder that beauty exists even if you touch it only through walls, a fleeting sense that life contains more than toil. And so the muffled sound becomes a kind of gift, one not given deliberately, but received nonetheless. And if we pause further, we see that these moments of relief or celebration, rare though they were, carried an outsized weight in the memory of the servants, for a single scrap of pastry might be recalled for weeks, retold in whispers at night as a mark of good fortune, a reminder that sweetness, though withheld, was not wholly absent. And a single evening when the strains of music seemed to drift especially clearly through the stones might live on in memory as a night when the boundary between servant and lord blurred, not in reality but in imagination. For though the hierarchy was unbreakable, though you would rise tomorrow to the same stale bread and the same stiff apron, still, in the marrow of your being, you had been touched by something different, and that difference gave you endurance, the capacity to bear the endless repetition of toil. For the mind feeds as much on hope as the body on bread, and so these rare interludes, scraps, echoes, remnants became nourishment as essential as food, clothing, or shelter, nourishment that worked upon the spirit rather than the body. And in this way we understand how even the smallest fragment of joy, when given to those who live on little, expands to fill vast spaces within the soul, reminding us again that the story of the servants is not only one of deprivation but also of resilience, that within their hidden lives there existed not only hardship but also the fragile yet enduring flame of celebration. And if we are to deepen the spell of immersion without breaking its meditative cadence, we may anchor ourselves gently, not with the sharp edges of lecture or the rigid scaffolding of dates, but with the soft touch of historical specifics that drift like threads of memory, tying the imagined to the real, so that the vision unfolding in our mind's eye gains weight, not as a list of facts, but as the quiet assurance that what we are seeing could indeed have been seen, what we are hearing could indeed have been heard. And so let us linger in the imagined kitchen, and then, like a shadow crossing time, let us tether it to places still standing, stones that still breathe with centuries of heat and smoke. For if you close your eyes and walk with me, you may find yourself in the 14th century, in a castle rising above the English countryside, perhaps Warwick its towers bold against the pale sky, its kitchens tucked within thick walls that have known both feast and famine, both celebration and siege. And you may feel the air cool and damp as you pass through its archways, the smell of ash and old stone mingling, and there in the kitchens once roared the same flames we imagine now, flames licking iron cauldrons, servants scurrying barefoot or in worn shoes across flagstones polished not by intention but by centuries of footsteps. And in that space the clang of pots still seems to echo if you listen closely. Though centuries have passed, 4 Warwick stones carry memory as surely as parchment carries ink. And if Warwick seems too distant, let us walk instead to Dover, perched on its cliff above the sea. Its kitchens built not only for sustenance, but also for resilience, for in such a place the line between survival and hunger was often drawn by the steady labor of those invisible hands who boiled broth, kneaded dough, salted fish, their work making possible the grandeur above, their toil making possible the security of walls. And though the names of most have vanished, the imprint of their labor lingers in the soot-blackened ceilings and the long troughs where water once ran. And if we step still further along the timeline, past the medieval centuries, into the dawn of Tudor majesty, we find Hampton Court, a kitchen preserved in stone and shadow, built not in the 14th but in the 16th century. And yet, though later in time, it still whispers to us of the scale, the heat, the rhythm of work that echoes what earlier castles knew, for its vaulted spaces remain darkened by centuries of smoke. Its vast hearths gape open as though still waiting for the crackle of oak logs. And if you walk there in silence, your hand brushing the rough surface of the walls, you can almost hear the hiss of dripping fat, the murmur of commands given and obeyed, the shuffle of scullions carrying trenchers. And though Hampton Court was shaped by the Tudors, by Henry VIII's insatiable appetite and his armies of cooks and servers, it still embodies something older, something reaching back to those 14th century kitchens in Warwick or Dover. The truth that castles, no matter how grand, stood upon the labor of kitchens, upon the endless cycle of grinding, boiling, roasting, sweeping, upon the hidden ecosystem of human hands and human hunger. And in this way, the preserved spaces of Hampton Court serve as a window not only into the Tudor world, but into the entire lineage of castle kitchens, reminding us that those centuries shift, those styles of dress and modes of power evolve. The fire at the heart of the kitchen burns in a rhythm older than any dynasty. And so these gentle anchors, Warwick and Dover in their medieval might, Hampton Court in its Tudor grandeur, do not intrude upon the vision, but instead enrich it. For they assure us that what we are imagining, the smell of herbs like parsley and sage crushed in mortar, the sour temps of ale fermenting nearby, the crackle of logs spitting sap into the air, the shuffle of wooden shoes across damp flagstones, these were not inventions but lived realities, realities whose traces still cling to stone, whose echoes still reverberate if you allow silence to settle and listen. And so, as we breathe in this layered vision, we do so not as dreamers, drifting wholly untethered, but as travelers, walking slowly along a path where imagination and history intertwine, where castles like Warwick and Dover stand as guardians of memory, where Hampton Court invites us to step into preserved spaces and, by doing so, to know more deeply the invisible servants whose labor sustained the rhythm of life itself. Bread was the heartbeat of the medieval kitchen, and to speak of bread is to speak of life itself. For in the 14th century, bread was not simply food, but the foundation of survival. The difference between satiety and hunger, between strength and weakness, between the holy and the profane. And if one descends into the kitchens of a great castle like Warwick or Dover, one can almost hear the rhythm of bread's making echoing in the shuffle of feet, the pounding of kneaded dough, the creak of ovens opening and closing, and one can smell the flour dust that hangs in the air like a pale fog, clinging to the rough wool tunics of scullions, and imprinting their eyelashes with a fine whiteness, and one can imagine the calloused hands, pressing, folding, stretching dough until their palms burn and blister from the unyielding heat of the oven. While outside in the fields, the harvest itself determines whether bread will be abundant or scarce, for the terror of a poor yield meant famine and the gnawing void of hunger, a reality that haunted every servant as surely as it haunted their masters, though the forms of bread they ate revealed sharp social boundaries. For the nobility dined on manchet, the pure white bread sifted from the finest bolted flour, soft as clouds, and baked in perfect loaves, while the servants and common folk chewed coarse maslin bread, brown heavy, made of mixed grains, like rye and barley, often sour, sometimes flecked with husk, a bread that filled the belly more than it delighted the tongue, and even the humble trencher bread, used as an edible plate beneath roasts in noble halls, spoke of hierarchy. For after the meat, juices soaked into it, the trencher was not thrown away, but handed down to servants or beggars as a second-hand meal, its worth measured by its distance from noble mouths. Yet in all this disparity, bread bore a sacred weight. For in the liturgy of the Church it was transfigured into the body of Christ, and so every loaf contained echoes of the Eucharist. Every crumb became a reminder of divine grace, every famine a sign of divine judgment. And in this way bread was not merely sustenance, but symbol, the eternal cycle of sowing, grinding, kneading, baking, eating, repeating, weaving together body and spirit, survival and salvation, so that even in its simplest form it carried the burden of meaning that no one in the kitchen could escape. If bread was the staff of life, ale and beer were its daily companion, and their presence filled every corner of the kitchen, for where water was often dangerous, tainted, crawling with unseen sickness, beer was safe, nourishing, and in its weaker form called small beer, it was drunk even by children, thin and sour, yet sustaining enough to keep scullions on their feet through long days. And the process of brewing itself was a sensory symphony. The smell of malted barley, drying near the fire, sweet and smoky, the crackling of grain under millstones, the thick porridge of mash steaming in great tubs, the gurgle and froth of fermentation as yeast rose to the surface, leaving scum to be scraped away, the earthy temps filling the air so strongly it clung to one's hair, and later the booming sound of barrels rolled across flagstones, stacked in shadowy cellars where damp wood swelled with liquid. And though servants drank small beer, the lords in the hall often drank fine imported wines from Gascony or the Rhine, rich with prestige and politics, for wine was as much a marker of class as clothing or language. And while the servant sipped watery ale that left no warmth in the chest, the lord might sip spiced hippocras, redolent with cinnamon and cloves, its very taste a declaration of wealth, and so again drink reinforced the ladder of rank, even as all shared in the same ritual of raising a cup, toasting health, drinking to endure another day. And in those moments of shared thirst, the kitchen reminded itself that liquid bread was as essential as solid, that ale was not simply comfort but survival, a quiet current carrying laborers through endless cycles of toil. Meat, however, was the dazzling center of feasting, the indulgence that marked power, wealth, and season, and its presence in the kitchen was overwhelming, for the roasting pits themselves seemed like furnaces, lined with spits that turned slowly by the hands of spitboys, their faces slick with sweat as they labored for hours near flames, eyes watering, lungs stung with smoke, arms aching as they kept the meat turning, always turning until flesh browned and fat hissed into the fire, sending sparks upward and in. November during Martinmas, the traditional season of slaughter. The kitchens filled with the smell of fresh blood, the sight of carcasses hanging from hooks, pigs and cattle butchered and salted to last through winter, the sound of knives cleaving bone, salt rubbed deep into muscle, smokehouses thick with curling haze that carried the smell of preservation. A lifeline through lean months, and yet here to class dictated taste, for while the nobility feasted on venison, a meat so bound to privilege that laws forbade its hunting by commoners, the servants gnawed on offal or the tougher scraps, their mouths watering at the smell of roasting beef they would never touch. Their hunger sharpened by proximity, their resentment dulled only by exhaustion. And yet on feast days the sheer abundance of meat could spill over to them. A small gift of grease-lick bones or leftover slices, enough to taste the luxury that usually remained out of reach. Enough to remind them that meat was more than food, it was status, it was privilege, it was law itself, inscribed on the body, for in the Middle Ages the diet one consumed was as much a marker of who one was as the clothes one wore or the prayers one said. If meat was the language of privilege, fish was the language of devotion, for the calendar of the church ruled the rhythms of eating. And on fast days, and during the long penitential seasons of Lent and Advent, the absence of meat was not deprivation but obedience, and fish became the substitute that bore both spiritual and practical meaning, filling tables with pike, herring, or eel, with salted stockfish that arrived stiff and hard from northern seas, so hard it had to be beaten with mallets before cooking. And in monasteries and castle kitchens alike, fish ponds and fisheries ensured supply, their waters shimmering with carp or tench bread for the fasting table. And the smell of fish sharp, briny, sometimes sour hung in kitchens where boiling pots fumed and servants strained nets. And for the lords, the symbolism of fish connected to Christ himself, the ichthys emblem of the faithful. But for servants, it meant yet another round of labor, gutting slippery bodies, scraping scales that stuck to hands, cooking dishes whose bones pricked tongues, and yet even this was layered with meaning, for to eat fish was to enter into rhythm with heaven's demand, to remember that the body could be tamed by the discipline of diet, to recognize that even hunger could be sanctified if it aligned with sacred time. Around all these staples, herbs and spices swirled like whispers of another world. For, though the servants tossed handfuls of parsley, sage, thyme, and leeks into their rough stews, drawn from humble gardens near the kitchen walls, the lords received dishes perfumed with saffron, pepper, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, and ginger. Treasures that had traveled from India, from Arabia, carried across seas and deserts by Venetian and Genoese traders, so costly that they were kept under lock and key in spice chests, measured out by stewards as though each grain were gold. And the presence of spice was more than taste. It was spectacle, transforming ordinary dishes into marvels, gilding sauces, masking the Thames of preserved meats, dazzling the palate, and testifying to the Lord's wealth and connections, while the servants who prepared these dishes could only inhale their fragrance without ever tasting them. Their own meals, flavored with onions and garlic, pungent but earthy, honest but coarse. And in this divide between spice and herb, one glimpsed the broader divide of medieval life. The hierarchy inscribed not just in what was eaten, but in what was smelled, tasted, imagined, for spices themselves were a kind of magic, a fusion of medicine, myth, and luxury, believed to preserve health, to stir desire, to carry echoes of the East, and so they lent to the kitchen an air of mystery. A reminder that even in a stone-walled castle, one lived within the currents of a global web of trade and imagination. And yet all these foods, bread, ale, meat, fish, herbs, spices, found their ultimate expression in the feast. The moment when the hierarchy of food reached its most dazzling display. And in the records of kings like Edward III or Richard II, we read of banquets where dozens of courses were served, where roasted peacocks arrived gilded with gold leaf, their feathers reattached to gleaming bodies, as though mythic creatures had landed on the table, where sugar subtleties, sculpted into castles or saints, amazed the eye before they melted on the tongue, where music played, laughter rose, and wine flowed in jeweled cups, and in such moments food was no longer sustenance but theater, a declaration of power and magnificence. Yet even here the servants felt the feast in another way. For while they carried platters up winding stairs, balancing silver dishes heavy with meat they would never taste, while they scraped grease from trenchers and licked crumbs of pastry left behind, while they listened to the echo of lutes and viols through thick walls, they were reminded that food could be both spectacle and exclusion, both wonder and torment. And in this contrast, the medieval kitchen revealed its paradox, that the same bread which was sacred in church could be stale and bitter in a servant's mouth, that the same ale which kept a peasant alive could be transformed into spiced hippocras for a noble's delight, that the same fish which fed a monk in obedience could leave a scullion's hands raw and smelling for days, that the same herbs which healed the sick could be overshadowed by saffron's golden glow, that the same meat which filled the hall with joy could fill the kitchen with hunger. And so the feast became both culmination and commentary, a mirror in which the entire medieval world was reflected with its splendor and scarcity, its abundance and absence, its piety and cruelty, its rituals of survival and its theater of power, all compressed into the act of eating, all echoing in the kitchens, where survival was forged in the smell of bread, the froth of ale, the smoke of meat, the salt of fish, the perfume of spice, and the hollow pang of hunger. A moon shriveled to a wafer of horn hangs above a city draped in silk and sleep. Down in the twisting alley called the Serpent's Spine, a cat's paws tread softly, softly. My name is Elias Vathic, and begin now the tale that threads my life together like a shroud. Not a story stitched in haste and filled with lumbering giants or ladies kissed asleep by dragons. No, mine is a chronicle of ordinary matter, of cats and common folk, and things that go bump in the night. And here is tonight's beginning. A boy on a narrow stair, the stink of stale urine laces the silence between shuttered houses, broken only by a distant lute and the splash of a fountain long since choked with leaves. And the boy, no bigger than 10 winters, shivers in the gathering dark, draws closer to the wall, huddling beneath a coil of rope dangling from a pulley, its hempen coils smelling sweetly of tar. He is alone, or so he believes, and the lie makes his heart ease a little. His name is Noah Ketter, and he is trying to remember why he came here, the tight seam of worry across his forehead deepening with every unanswered breath. Something important, something lost, something found, or maybe something feared. But as the shadows stretch toward him, reaching fingers that claw at the twilight, the why evaporates, leaving him clutching at nothing, and he squeezes his eyes shut, waiting for sleep to steal him away. But beneath the stillness, a rustle, the rasp of claws on stone, and the flash of a green eye slitted against the dark. Noah flinches, not daring to breathe, as a shadow lengthens and twists on the opposite wall, taking shape. A large shape, lithe, feral, feline, moving with unnerving grace. As it circles, Noah curls tighter, willing himself to become smaller, to melt into the damp mortar between stones. And in the corner, the cat, sleek and wary, regards him for a long moment, its gaze unwavering. And then it vanishes up a ladder, rungs, leaving Noah trembling against the cold wall until the first stars prick the sky and a lone lantern flickers in the distance. Then, remembering his errand, he straightens, smoothing his tattered tunic, and goes in search of what he forgot to find, or perhaps what he hoped to leave behind. In the fading light, at the foot of the ladder, he stoops to pick up a fallen brick, runs his thumb along its edge, feeling the chill seep into his bones. And suddenly, the city stirs around him, its nighttime hum rising like the tide, drowning his loneliness. Here, the walls are thick with memories, the echoes of voices long gone, of lovers and merchants and soldiers, come and gone. Each footstep rings with a history only the stones know. With a sigh, he rises, the brick heavy in his hand, and joins the current flowing through the secret heart of the city. He walks on, passing doorways where shadowed figures move, hearing snatches of conversation and laughter. He sees faces lit by candlelight, hears the clink of tankards, the murmur of prayers, and for a brief moment, he feels part of something larger, something that binds him to the city, to its joys and sorrows, to its hopes and fears. And when he stops, it is to rest against a fountain choked with fallen leaves, its basin reflecting the faint glow of a street lamp high above. There he sits, hugging his knees to his chest, and lets the city wrap around him like a blanket, hiding him from the vast indifference of the universe. In the tangled alleys and crooked squares, the night unfolds. He hears the music now, the lilting notes of a flute weaving between the buildings, mingling with the murmur of 100 conversations. From a nearby tavern, the sound of laughter spills out, carrying with it the scent of roasted meat and spiced wine. In the square, a group of men played dice by the dim light of a lantern, their voices hushed with concentration. And in the shadows, watching them, a figure cloaked in darkness, hidden by the gloom. His face is obscured by the deep hood of his cloak, his features lost in the shadows. Only a pair of eyes gleams brightly, sharp and alert, taking in everything, seeing secrets that others miss. From his vantage point, he observes the game, his gaze fixed on the dice as they clatter on the stone table, and he watches the players, noting their gestures, their inflections, the way they glance over their shoulders. It's a game of chance, of skill, and perhaps a little bit of guile. And the players, unaware of his scrutiny, let fate decide their fortunes. As the night deepens, the city comes alive. Couples stroll hand in hand, their laughter echoing through the narrow streets. Peddlers hawk their wares, their voices competing with the strumming of a lute. The air is alive with the scent of roasting meat, sweet pastries, and the tang of vinegar. And everywhere, the murmur of voices, the rumble of carts, the laughter and chatter of people going about their evening rituals. He follows the sounds of revelry, moving through the labyrinthine streets, and he sees a crowd gathered in a small clearing. The crowd gasps and applauds, as he tosses them high in the air and catches them deftly, his face illuminated by the flickering flames, and he watches, his gaze intense, his expression unreadable. The juggling ends to scattered applause, and the man bows, bowing low and then disappearing into the crowd, leaving the echo of firelight in his wake. He lingers a moment longer, taking in the scene, the laughter, the chatter, the sense of community, and then, as silently as he came, he melts back into the shadows, his presence unnoticed, his purpose unknown. In the maze of ancient streets, hidden between weathered walls and time-worn stones, the night unfolds, shaping stories that touch the heart and dance on the edge of the sword. For in this city, where shadows play and secrets whisper, destinies intertwine, and the rhythm of the night sets the stage for lives forever changed. The scene is both fascinating and vivid, isn't it? But have you ever wondered how such a scene might have appeared in a book? Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. This will be part 3 of our series on castles, which so far has taken us from siege warfare to royal progression. If you haven't seen the previous videos, check them out here. But what exactly makes this topic so intriguing? What is it about medieval castle kitchens that capture our imagination? Well, much of its allure stems from the sheer dynamism of this setting. It was the heart of medieval life, a bustling hub where social hierarchy, politics, and daily life intersected. It's a microcosm of the medieval world. The kitchen was where sustenance turned into nourishment, where ingredients transformed into a reflection of wealth, status, and power. For medieval nobility, elaborate feasts weren't just about sustenance. They were a display of power and prestige. The kitchen, therefore, became a stage where culinary artistry played out under the watchful eyes of servants and nobles alike. They're full of potential conflicts, tensions, and dramatic opportunities. Just think about it. In a single scene, you can explore themes of social hierarchy, power dynamics, personal ambitions, betrayals, and even life and death. Threatens to disrupt everything. Or picture the clash of wills between a head chef and a young apprentice with differing visions of the perfect dish. Perhaps a cook risks everything to smuggle food out to starving peasants, or a poisoned dish becomes the center of a murder mystery. The possibilities are endless. Step 1. Setting the scene. When writing any scene, setting the stage is crucial, and a medieval castle kitchen offers a rich tapestry of sensory details waiting to be explored. The air would be thick with the aroma of roasting meats, fragrant herbs, and freshly baked bread. Don't forget the less pleasant aspects either. The stench of stale waste and chamber pots could mingle with the savory smells, creating a pungent, almost overwhelming atmosphere. Imagine the flickering light of torches casting dancing shadows on the rough stone walls adorned with hanging hooks, shelves, and drying herbs. To fully immerse your reader in this setting, use vivid sensory details that bring the sights, sounds, smells, tastes, and textures to life. Step 2. Showcasing culinary craftsmanship. The heart of your story is the food. Medieval cuisine, while different from our modern fare, is a delicious world of flavors waiting to be rediscovered. Your head chef character could be concocting a sumptuous feast fit for a king, complete with exotic ingredients and intricate cooking techniques. Remember, the kitchen was a place where culinary skills were highly valued and often a reflection of the chef's social status. Think about the challenges of cooking without modern tools and the ingenuity required to create complex dishes with limited resources. Step 3. Hierarchy and politics. Don't overlook the political undertones of the medieval castle kitchen. The kitchen was a microcosm of the social hierarchy of the time. The head chef held a position of power, much like a modern head of household. But there were layers of authority below him, with cooks, undercooks, and scullions having their own ranks and responsibilities. Explore the dynamics between these characters and how they navigate their social standing within the kitchen. Consider the tensions that might arise from the power struggles, rivalries, and alliances that form among them. Step 4. Adding conflict and suspense. Conflict is the spice of storytelling. In a medieval castle kitchen, conflict can arise from various sources. A shortage of supplies, a sudden visit from a VIP, or even a kitchen fire could send your characters into a frenzy. Perhaps a cook accuses another of stealing, or there's a fight over a misplaced ingredient. Maybe a visiting noble takes a dislike to the head chef's cooking, or an apprentice experiments with a new recipe with disastrous results. Conflicts like these inject tension into your story and reveal the inner workings and pressures of this high-stakes environment. Step 5. Bringing history to life. Research the history of medieval castle kitchens and incorporate authentic details into your writing. Mention historical figures who might have dined in similar kitchens. Describe the types of food they might have eaten and the etiquette they would have observed. Discuss the role of the kitchen in medieval society and its importance in the running of a castle. By infusing your story with historical accuracy, you add depth and authenticity to your narrative, bringing the past to life for your readers. Let's take a moment to recap the key takeaways from today's video. Crafting a scene in a medieval castle kitchen involves setting the scene with vivid sensory details, showcasing culinary craftsmanship, exploring the social hierarchy, adding conflict and suspense, and bringing history to life. Each of these steps contributes to creating a captivating and immersive experience for your readers. Now I'd love to hear from you. Do you have a favorite medieval castle kitchen scene from a book or movie? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please hit the thumbs up button. As always, thanks for joining me on this journey through the fascinating world of medieval castles. Until next time, happy writing, and may your stories be filled with the aromas and excitement of a medieval castle kitchen. When we think of food, we usually think of fuel, sustenance for the flesh. But in the medieval kitchen, food was more than that. It was a weaving of the mundane with the sacred, the hearth with the altar. Every loaf of bread was a piece of the Eucharist, the body of Christ, broken in the chapel, just as it was broken in the hall. Each piece carried with it the unspoken reminder that bread was holy, that bread was life, that bread was a sacrament. So the terror of failed harvests or mold-spoiled grain was not just hunger, it was spiritual dread. Famine was felt as divine chastisement, emptiness of stomach translating to emptiness of soul. Fire, too, had a sacred weight. It glowed in the blackened heart of the castle's kitchen hearth, a paradox of destruction and transformation. Burning wood to ash, even as it turned dough to sustenance and raw flesh to roasted meat. It was a holy alchemy. Servants who stood too close to the spits must have known the double edge of fire's blessing and curse, its warmth and its punishment. And so it was with every ingredient, every gesture, every meal. A constant reminder that even in the mundane, the sacred was never far away. Now, don't go thinking this video is about some fancy restaurant in Burgundy or Paris. Nope. They had more pressing things on their minds, like not dying of starvation or getting burnt to death. But there's a reason I chose to call this place an anteworld. In the kitchen of a 14th century castle, the senses are not merely touched, but battered, overwhelmed. It speaks a language of its own, a tongue of crackle and snap, which the servants learn as well as any spoken word. They know by heart its shifts in tone, its quiet moments and sudden screams. For inside this vastness, there is the sharper hiss, when a ladle of water or a pot lid drips its moisture into the blaze, releasing a spitting protest that echoes against the soot-blackened walls. A reminder that every drop of water is fleeting in the face of fire, every human hand at risk if it wanders too close. And within it, the undercurrent of smaller noises, the scurrying feet of rats, bold enough to dart between barrels of grain, their claws tapping against wood like furtive drumbeat, and the muffled thud of cleavers striking butcher blocks, not once, but again and again, in a steady cadence that is more heartbeat than hammer, chaotic and yet inevitable, every note repeating day after day, until it is less music than incantation. And if we close our eyes and linger here long enough, we can hear how the repetition itself becomes a chant, the clatter of market carts passing far below, the distant peal of a bell, the shouted jest of children playing, snatches of an outside world that push in like intruders, declaring their brief independence before melting back into the murmur of the unseen. And then the smells arrive, layered, clashing, interwoven so tightly that no servant could ever tell where one ended and another began. The brightness of herbs, crushed in mortar, sharp parsley and sage mingling with the peppery bite of mustard seed, fleeting moments of freshness that pierce the air like tiny bells, but they are swallowed quickly by heavier scents. The rank sweetness of meat past its prime, veined with rot and rescued only by the reckless hand of spice. The dense animal odor of fat sizzling over flame, thick enough to cling to hair and tunic and skin, so that even when the servants stumble to bed, they carry the smell into their sleep, and beneath it all lingers the faint but persistent temps of smoke. Always smoke, penetrating the pores of the stone, staining the rafters, refusing to release its hold, drifting just long enough to torment those who will never taste it, for the pastry will be carried upstairs, golden and glistening, while down here a scullion gnaws, a crust too hard for teeth to pierce without effort, the sweetness lingering in the air like a hymn half remembered. Yet it is not only ears and nose that are assaulted in this place, but hands and skin, for the kitchen is a world of touch, and the body learns its lessons through pain as much as labor. Blistered hands from hauling iron pots too heavy for small wrists, burns blooming red on arms held too close to spit or cauldron, splinters embedded in palms from handling rough wood, benches chopping blocks, barrels whose surfaces are never smoothed for servant comfort, and aprons so stiff with grease that they crackle when folded, a second skin that grows heavier with each day's work, until a servant feels as though he is wearing the labor itself pressed against his chest. And beneath the apron, coarse wool tunics that scratch at the skin, never softened by finery, always damp with sweat. For the kitchen is heat, unrelenting, searing, filling every fold of fabric with moisture. Salt crystals drying on brows only to be renewed again, and so the servants move not in comfort, but in a perpetual state of abrasion. Pressed by fabric, pressed by air, pressed by fire, each sensation a reminder of labor's endless claim. And so we must listen, and listen again, to the pulse of this place. For it tells us as much about the bodies that inhabit it as the stones that contain it. It says that these men and women know their flesh is not their own, that they are marked by the tools and substances that make up their world, that they are living tapestries woven from threadbare cloth and hardening grease. It says that their scars are not badges of honor, but tally marks in a ledger of pain, and that the battle against hunger is fought not only with knife and pot, but with their own bodies offered on the altar of endless labor. It also says something about the nature of labor itself, that it is not simply work, but an overwhelming presence, a spirit that haunts every step, demanding constant vigilance, that it is a physical force that beats against the body like waves upon the shore, a relentless tide that crashes and crashes, leaving its salty trace upon the skin. Labor is not just something we do, it is something that does us, shapes us, binds us to a rhythm older than memory, more powerful than will. And finally, it whispers a secret truth about the medieval world, that it was not merely a time of plagues and wars and feasts, but of bodies, countless bodies, working, suffering, sweating, perishing. Here in the flickering lamplight, amidst the clutter of pots and the ghosts of meals, we encounter a humanity as immediate as our own, bound to this place by ropes of sinew and appetite, driven by hopes, both grand and small, tasting victory in each loaf, baked each fowl, dispatched each belly temporarily full. We find ourselves among those who lived hand to mouth, who bartered hours of back-breaking toil for a meager share of what they grew and caught and made, who walked the tightrope between feast and famine, always hungry, never sated, who knew the bite of winter cold and the sting of summer heat, who watched their fellows fall victim to fever or blade, who buried their dead under a cacophony of crows and the indifferent gaze of the sun. For this is what it means to live on the edge of plenty, to exist in the shadow of abundance, to work in the shadow of abundance, to watch others feast while serving up the very dishes that make their plenty possible, to be essential and invisible, indispensable and alone. All these impressions, sound, smell, touch, do not stand alone, but weave into each other until they form a tapestry of repetition, a cadence that is less descriptive detail than living rhythm. And if we attend closely, we hear how the hiss of water echoes the hiss of breath from a boy too close to the flames, how the thud of cleaver mirrors the pounding of tired feet against flagstones, how the sweetness of honey in the air collides cruelly with the dryness of bread in the mouth, how the grease that stiffens cloth also coats the tongue, how every sense converges into a chant of labor, 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 repeating endlessly, and with each repetition, the mind of the servant drifts toward trance, because, in the kitchen, time is not marked by the sun or the bell, but by these sensations looping again and again, like rosary beads fingered in endless prayer. The fire roars, the cleaver falls, the rat scurries, the smell of sage rises, the fat spits, the apron stiffens, the hand blisters, the honey drifts away, and then again. The fire roars, the cleaver falls, the rat scurries, the sage rises, the fat spits, the apron stiffens, the hand blisters, the honey drifts away, and the cadence of the kitchen becomes a meditation unto itself, brutal and wholly weary and eternal, a litany, not written in books, but carved into flesh and memory, until the servant cannot separate his own heartbeat from the rhythm of the room, until sound and smell and touch are no longer background, but the very measure of existence. And thus the medieval kitchen is not simply a place of work, but a world entire, a universe whose stars are sparks, whose incense is smoke, whose prayers are the thuds and hisses of endless, endless labor. The metate, a stone's journey through Maya life and afterlife. It is not easy to find an artifact more ubiquitous than the metate. It is not much to look at. It is generally unadorned, often cracked, occasionally bearing gash marks from careless use or old age. It is large, heavy, difficult to transport, impossible to ignore. Nearly every Maya household has one, as does every ancient Maya site, as do households throughout Mesoamerica, as well as places as far away as the Philippines. What other object, besides the metate, could have such range? How can we imagine its life, its death and rebirth? How does it speak to us today? In the beginning, the metate is born not from human hands alone, but from the mountain, from volcanic rock, hewn from quarries that themselves pulse with memory of fire, cooled lava transformed into stone. The metate material, dense enough to crush kernels into powder, is quarried, chipped, and hauled back to the village. One must imagine the men who make this journey. They arrive at the chosen mountain early in the day, their tunics tucked in against scraggly bushes and vines, their sandals offering scant protection against sharp rocks and pebbles. They bring with them implements of flint and wooden hammers. The quarry face looms before them, dark and forbidding. They get to work. They chip away at the rock face, cut blocks, haul them down, stack them on the carrying poles that arch between their forearms, and trudge back towards the village. The men walk in silence, focused on the path ahead, their muscles screaming in protest, their brows slick with sweat. Their minds are steady with purpose. They know that each stone they carve may serve a household for generations. They are making something that will endure, that will pass from mother to daughter, grandmother to granddaughter, as enduring as bloodlines themselves. When they reach the village, others will receive praise, the merchants, the hunters, the warriors. Their work is visible, dramatic, even glorious. But what they do here, these quarrymen, is invisible, unglamorous, necessary. When the stone first enters the household, it is not yet alive, not until it is paired with its companion, the mano, the handheld stone that will move back and forth across its flat, slightly concave surface. And together these two, mano and metate, form a union as inseparable as earth and sky, husband and wife, maize and water. The Maya understood that grinding maize was not merely a domestic chore, but a reenactment of creation itself, a ritual act by which hard kernels were transformed into masa, pliable dough that could be shaped into tortillas, tamales, atole, the very essence of sustenance. And so each morning before dawn, before the roosters crowed, before the village stirred, women would kneel before the metate, their knees pressing into worn mats, their bodies rocking forward and back with the rhythm of grinding, and the sound, oh, the sound was like a chant, a low and steady rasp, stone against stone, flesh against grain, the hushed murmur of survival. Smells filled the air, too, the faint sweetness of raw maize, earthy and dry, mingling with smoke from hearth fires that never truly died out, only dimmed through the night, awaiting the breath of kindling, awaiting the return of hands to coax them into flame. And as the first tortillas sizzled on clay kamalas, the household awoke not with words, but with sensory liturgy, smell, sound, texture, each a prayer, each a promise that life continues today as it did yesterday and will tomorrow. For maize was not just food, it was flesh. As the Popol Vuh tells, humankind was shaped of maize dough, yellow and white corn molded by divine hands. So every grinding was both practical and sacred, both daily necessity and cosmic remembrance. Yet to consider the life cycle of a matete is to move beyond the dawn hours into years and decades. For as it is used, its surface changes, its stone becomes smoother, grooved by the countless strokes of the mano, darkened by oils from kernels and hands, scarred by time. There is intimacy in this erosion, as if the stone absorbs the touch of generations, holding memory not in words, but in texture, in polished ridges and softened edges, so that to kneel before an old matard is to kneel before the labor of ancestors, to press one's weight upon the very grooves they carved with their own persistence. But like all things, the matete ages, it wears thin, it chips, it cracks, and when it can no longer grind effectively, when maize slides too freely over its surface without yielding fine powder, its life as a grinding stone ends, though not its life as a sacred object. For such stones were rarely discarded carelessly. Sometimes they were buried in courtyards, laid to rest like elders. Sometimes they were placed in walls or foundations, becoming part of the architecture, silent witnesses built into the bones of the home. Sometimes they were offered in ritual deposits, fragments mingling with broken pots, obsidian blades, shells, as if to return their energy to the earth from which they came. Imagine a Maya household at such a moment. The family gathers perhaps a woman's hands, lingering on the stone she used since girlhood, remembering mornings with her mother, the cadence of grinding learned in her own body, passed on through muscle memory rather than words. In this precious space between use and discard, between functionality and ritual, between the everyday and the transcendent, the Maya saw a reflection of the natural world. Mountains gave way to fertile valleys. The grinding stone became an image of the earth itself, giving birth to maize, giving birth to people. In the act of letting go, there is both grief and continuity, for even as one matate retires, another takes its place, fresh and rough, ready to carve new grooves, to absorb new lifetimes. And so the life cycle of a metate mirrors the cycle of maize itself, from seed to stalk to kernel to dough to bread, from quarry to household to grave, both stone and grain bound by the same rhythm of birth, growth, use, and return. And this cycle anchors not only individual lives but the cosmology of the Maya, who saw in every grinding the echo of creation, in every tortilla the flesh of gods, in every stone the endurance of earth. The matard, then, is not an object at the periphery, but the center, not silent, but resonant, humming with the energy of centuries, a heartbeat beneath the larger heartbeat of time itself. And to dwell upon it long enough is to feel how history is not written in words, but in grooves worn into stone, in kneeling bodies swaying in rhythm, in the mingled smells of maize and smoke, in the echo of children chewing tortillas warm from the comal, their mouths filled with both nourishment and tradition, their bellies carrying forward not only sustenance but identity. For to eat maize ground upon a metate is to be Maya, to exist within a chain unbroken. And so this humble grinding stone, overlooked by outsiders, unpolished by artisans, unadorned by gold or jade, stands as one of the greatest monuments of the civilization. A monument not of conquest or kingship, but of endurance, of daily life, of quiet persistence. And in its life cycle, one can read the full story of a people who made stones sing and maize into flesh, who turned the simplest act into the most profound liturgy, and whose survival rests still in the dust of grain ground upon a stone that will outlast them, carrying forward the faint but eternal sound of hands against maize, maize against stone, stone against time. Thank you for watching. We want to imagine a kitchen in medieval England. But how big was it? Well, first up, when we try to bind this imagined kitchen to the real record of England's great houses and palaces, the first anchor comes from the late 14th century, when Richard II, a monarch infamous for pomp and display, codified his household's rhythms in ordinances that survive on parchment, telling us that his kitchens required hundreds of servants, not only cooks, but scullions, spitboys, pantlers for bread, butlers for wine, yeomen of the scullery, yeomen of the saucery pages, and porters, so that the daily preparation of food was less a domestic task than the running of a city in miniature. The documents tell us of 30 or 40 cooks, of bread baked by the hundred, of fish, fowl, and venison prepared in quantities that make the modern imagination reel. And while these numbers are staggering in scale, what they conceal is equally telling, for they do not record the burns across the forearm of a spitboy, nor the smoke that reddened a scullion's eyes until tears streamed into the pot he stirred, nor the constant scalds from boiling cauldrons that mottled skin with pale scars. But if we read carefully, if we take the official record as skeleton and reattach flesh through imagination guided by archaeology and comparative evidence, then we can see the lived truth behind the cold ink. The Warwick Castle kitchens, still partially preserved, remind us of this, for their bread ovens were massive, stone mouths wide enough to bake dozens upon dozens of loaves in a single firing. They're blackened interiors, proof of centuries of flour-dusted labor, and to stand before them is to feel the way. Bread making was not simply kneading and rising, but an industrial cycle. Men shoving paddle after paddle into the heat, pulling out loaves crusted and steaming. Yet Warwick's ovens are only one glimpse, and if we leap forward to Hampton Court, built for Wolsey, then claimed by Henry VIII, we see roasting pits so grand, so deep, that whole carcasses could be turned, their oxen on spits so long that men had to use mechanical wheels to rotate them. Vast fireplaces whose ceilings are black with smoke even now, and these later kitchens, though Tudor, can be read symbolically backwards, reminding us that scale itself was part of power, that noble dining depended upon spectacles of abundance, and that behind every banquet hall lay a hidden geography of soot grease and aching backs. Archaeology sharpens the picture further, for when excavations are carried out at castle middens or urban sites associated with elite households, the animal bones speak more honestly than royal ordinances ever could, revealing that venison, swan, heron, and beef were eaten in the great halls above the long bones, cut with practiced butchery, while the refuse piles associated with servant quarters show gnawed, off-cuts, marolus fragments, pig trotters, chicken feet, and fish heads, all the edible remnants diverted to those who cooked them. The stratigraphy of class visible in bone and ash, and so when the ordinances record meat for 300, we must translate that into lived distributions, imagining the noble lord biting into haunch, while the scullion sops his bread in thin broth made from what was left, and this discrepancy between record and reality is crucial for it. Lets us juxtapose text with body, writing with scar scale with exhaustion, so that the grandeur of 300 servants in the kitchen must be paired with the unrecorded fact that 300 lungs inhaled smoke, that 300 stomachs growled as they cooked food. They would never taste that 300 dreams were bent beneath ceilings, blackened with soot. To tether this even more firmly, we can look at surviving kitchen accounts where line after line itemizes not only the food purchased, but the fuel, cords of firewood, sacks of charcoal. And in those lines we glimpse not only diet, but environment, the ceaseless felling of forests to feed the hearths, the sweat of boys dragging logs across flagstones, the ache of arms lifting fuel into flames. For a great kitchen was not merely a place of food, but of energy transformed at staggering cost. Yet, unlike the matat in a Maya home, they were not mythic, they were expendable, replaceable, and so too were the people, scullions and spitboys, dismissed, beaten, or replaced if they faltered their humanity, as unrecorded as the life of a broken jug. Thus, when we bind all this evidence together, the ordinances of Richard II, the ovens of Warwick, the roasting pits of Hampton Court, the bones from middens, the tools from archaeological layers, we see not only scale but inequality, not only abundance but deprivation, and the historian's task is to give breath to what lies between the lines, to imagine the cough of the spitboy standing too close to the smoke, the whispered joke between two scullions as they huddle by the doorway, the fatigue in the hands of the pantler dividing bread loaves he will never sit at, so that the grandeur of noble dining is always counterpointed by the fragility of those who made it possible, their lives invisible in record but legible in scars, their voices drowned in the roar of fires but still echoing if we listen carefully. And perhaps the truest way to honor them is to let the record and the ruin speak together, the parchment giving us scale, the archaeology giving us detail, and the imagination giving us empathy, so that 300 servants in the kitchen becomes not an abstract number, but 300 lives, each with breath, hunger, laughter, grief, burns, dreams, and silence. I'm a professor of medieval history. If you'd like to learn more about the period, please check out my other content. And so we return, again and again, to the mantra: bread and body, bread and Christ, bread and hunger, bread and hunger, bread and Christ, bread and Christ, bread and hunger. And in the rhythm of those words, we hear both the monk at prayer and the servant at toil, both seeking grace, both confronting absence, both measuring their lives against the eternal fire that transforms and consumes, the eternal salt that purifies and corrodes, the eternal ale that comforts and enslaves, the eternal bread that feeds and denies. One more time before we begin, let me say that this is a new series exploring medieval history through the senses. And because sight is the sense most often used to capture the past, we're starting with sound. If you would like to learn about medieval history through touch, smell, taste, and hearing, please consider subscribing. The kitchen was all sound. Its noises defined the hours of the day, marked the passing of seasons, distinguished rank, announced the presence of death, and hinted at salvation. Bread and body, bread and Christ, bread and hunger. The chant begins. A litany as old as the church and as raw as the empty stomach of a servant watching loaves pass from oven to high table, without ever touching his own lips, for bread in the medieval kitchen was never merely food, it was Eucharist refracted through class, a crust reminding the priest of transubstantiation while reminding the scullion only of gnawing want, and yet both touched the same substance, the same warm crumb, the same crackle of crust, broken so that bread became the narrow hinge between the sacred and the mundane, the eternal and the daily. And in this hinge lies the paradox. The nobleman lifted bread as a sign of Christ's body, white wheat flour, chosen for its purity, while the servant chewed coarse rye or barley brown and heavy a body, just as real but not sanctified by liturgy. And still, even in his hunger, the servant might whisper the same words to himself: bread and body, bread and Christ, bread and hunger, hoping that in the chewing of dark bread some spark of grace might slip into his mouth. Fire, too, was double, destructive and transformative, and the kitchen hearth, though choking with smoke and heat, could be read as a mirror of purgation, the flames licking the sides of cauldrons like the imagined flames licking the souls of the departed, purifying them through torment, cleansing them through pain. And how could the spit boy, skin blistered and eyes watering, not feel that his own daily suffering was a kind of purgatory enacted in miniature, a waiting place of fire where endurance might purchase redemption, where his pain might stand in for the unknown suffering of others, so that each rotation of meat over flame became a silent cycle of damnation and hope, damnation and hope, damnation and hope. Ale, too, held its double power, for it was sustenance in liquid form, liquid bread, as it has been called, the fermentation, preserving grains, turning them into drinkable calories that filled the stomach and warmed the chest. And yet that same drink dulled the senses, numbed the ache of hunger, softened the sharp edges of exploitation, so that a servant who drank might endure, might stumble through another day of labor. And endurance itself was a virtue, but also a trap. For numbed, he did not rebel; numbed, he did not run; numbed, he could continue to lift cauldrons and scrub pots without collapse. And so ale was both gift and fetter, blessing and chain, an opiate brewed from barley that both sustained and subdued. Salt was crystal, salt was purity, salt was preservation, salt was necessity, for without it meat rotted, fish spoiled, life became fragile, and in every kitchen salt was measured carefully, locked away sometimes as if it were treasure. But salt also bore a symbolic weight, for in Scripture it was covenant. You are the salt of the earth, a phrase reminding the faithful that to be salt was to preserve and to purify, to flavor and to sanctify. And yet in the practical world of kitchens, salt was also wage. For the very word salary derives from salt. Roman legions once paid in measures of it, and by medieval times the echo lingered, so that to handle salt was to handle both holiness and livelihood, both sacrament and coin. And when we braid these together, bread, fire, ale, salt, we see not only the material diet of the servant's body, but the symbolic diet of his soul, each element whispering layers of meaning whether he knew it or not. Bread feeding body and hinting at Eucharist, fire cooking food and hinting at purgation, ale sustaining and sedating, salt preserving and signifying purity, so that the kitchen was not only a place of labor, but a shadow chapel, a cloister of the unordained, its liturgy enacted without vestments, its prayers muttered in hunger rather than sung in choir. And if we return again to the chant, bread and body, bread and Christ, bread and hunger, we can see how repetition itself becomes meditation, how the cycle of kneading dough, stoking fire, filling tankards, and sprinkling salt is not unlike the cycle of prayer beads passed through fingers, each gesture carrying a weight beyond itself, each repetition layering meaning upon meaning. And yet, for the servant, this layering was bitter. For he was always caught between symbol and lack, always aware that bread signified Christ even as he held none, that fire purified even as it burned his skin, that ale sustained even as it enslaved, that salt purified even as it reminded him of wages withheld. In this tension lies the spiritual undercurrent of the medieval kitchen, a place where theology was not studied but suffered, where doctrine was not read but tasted, and in that tasting, whether of coarse bread or watered ale, the servant lived out a theology of deprivation, his body the altar, his scars the scripture, his hunger the liturgy. I recently came across this quote from a book called Eating Christmas in the Middle Ages, and I cannot stop thinking about it. The author writes, "For all the talk of shortages, hunger, and famine, there is little evidence that anyone actually starved in England during the medieval period." And that got me thinking about what we owe to those who have come before us, to their efforts, their ingenuity, their sweat, their tears, their blood, which allowed us to be alive today. If we had to do everything ourselves, if we had to start from scratch, we wouldn't be able to do many of the things we take for granted now. We have been given so much by those who have gone before us, by their sacrifices, their innovations, their discoveries, the accumulated knowledge that allows us to build upon their shoulders instead of reinventing the wheel. There's this wonderful metaphor in the Tao Te Ching that I think about a lot, that I actually have a tattoo of on my arm. It goes, being deeply rooted in the Tao, we can be carefree, going with the flow. We can be beyond compare. By letting it go, it all gets done. The world is won by those who let it go. But when we try and try, the world is beyond the winning. And I think that applies here. Trying to understand medieval history without acknowledging our debt to those who came before us. Trying to explain the medieval period without the benefit of all the work that scholars have done before us. Trying to teach medieval history without the texts they have analyzed, the articles they've written, the books they've published, all of it, done from scratch, it would be an impossibility. My favorite thing about being a teacher is knowing that I am able to give you something that I myself have received. I'm able to pass on to you things that people have taught me, insights they've shared with me, ideas that have sparked my own research, inspiration that set me on my path. In a way, you are receiving these things directly from them, and that makes me very happy. I hope that you will take this inspiration and this knowledge and do great things with it. Use it to improve your own lives, to make the world a better place, to be the best version of yourself possible. That is why I do what I do, and that is why I share what I share with you. We have been given so much by those who have gone before us, by their sacrifices, their innovations, their discoveries, the accumulated knowledge that allows us to build upon their shoulders instead of reinventing the wheel. So I wanted to use this platform to send a big thank you to all of our patrons and channel members, the people who support us on a crowdfunding platform. You allow me to do what I do, to share my passion for medieval history with the world. Without you, this wouldn't be possible. And I know that because I started this channel with nothing. I had to do everything myself, and it was impossible. So, thank you. Thank you for allowing me to be here and allowing me to do what I do. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to make something beautiful out of something that was, at one point, nothing more than an idea. And thank you for being a part of my life. The creak of wooden pails, the muffled cough of a scullion hauling himself upright from straw. And in this hour, the kitchen is already stirring, though no noble eye yet opens. Kindling gathered the night before is coaxed into flame, while water is hauled from the well, heavy and sloshing in pails that cut into the servants' palms. The lumps now swelling, breathing, alive with promise, pressed and folded again, dust rising into the air like ghostly motes, until the loaves are lined upon boards waiting for the oven's heat. But then comes the long expansion of morning into midday, when the gray grows gold and the castle above stirs. Meat set upon spits, dripping fat into fire, hissing and flaring as boys turn the iron rods with blistered hands. A layering of scents so dense it becomes almost another texture pressing down on the lungs. And the servants run, arms laden with trenchers, ladles, tankards, their bodies weaving through the cramped chamber like threads in a loom, each one pulled into place by the demands of hunger above, so that each servant feels himself a cog in a machine of consumption. And the hours of midday are frantic, hot, endless, a purgatory of sweat and clatter, where even thought seems burned away. Return, all until the hall is sated and the kitchen collapses, not into rest, but into the long unwinding of evening, when the last platters have been borne away, and what remains are bones piled like cairns. A record of abundance turned into refuse, ash thick upon the stones, the spits cooling at last, though they are still smeared with grease. And here, in the dusk of the kitchen, is the most human of rituals, the furtive feast of those who cooked but did not eat, when the last jug is rinsed and the hearth left to smolder. Then the kitchen exhales its final breath, falling into stillness as night thickens. In fires stoked, in bones discarded, in crumbs stolen, in ash swept, in the rhythm of survival, so that the servant lives not in days or years, but in the pulse of this eternal cycle. Dawn, smoke, noon, fire, dusk, ash, and always hunger at the center, hunger at the edges, hunger shaping the flow of all things. It is here, at the close, that we must return to the truth that has pulsed quietly beneath every layer of description, every sensory unfolding, every historical anchor and whispered inner thought. The truth that the kitchen was not merely a chamber of fire and smoke, nor merely a workplace of sweat and survival, but the hidden heart of the castle itself, its steady pulse, its unseen heartbeat, pounding beneath floors of marble and tapestries, beneath laughter and music, beneath the golden glitter of feasts and the hollow echo of goblets raised in toasts. And this pulse was not the measured beat of elegance or ceremony, but the ragged rhythm of toil, of breath caught in smoke, of feet scurrying on stone, of hands blistered by iron, of hunger gnawing as persistently as fire. And yet it was this pulse, invisible, unmarked, ignored, that made possible everything above. For the feast that nobles called abundance was built on invisible foundations, on fires tended by children whose names were never written, on bread kneaded by women whose bodies bent into silence, on water hauled by arms that ached but did not falter, on bones scraped clean by hunger, before being discarded to dogs. And so, though the record speaks of lords and their tables, though the song sings of banquets and their glory, what truly sustained the feast was the unseen kitchen, the shadowed labor, the heartbeat of smoke and ash. And if one listens deeply enough, listens beneath the roar of fire, beneath the clash of platters, beneath the laughter of nobles, one hears it, faint yet steady, the rhythm of survival, the pulse that fed the castle. The feast above was gold and laughter. Yes, it was silk sleeves brushing silver goblets. It was torches flickering against painted walls. It was music rising from lutes and voices lifted in song. But all of this brilliance floated upon something heavier, denser, earthier, something made of sweat and smoke and salt, made of grease-stiffening aprons, made of ash clinging to hair, made of bread broken not in ceremony but in shadows, shared furtively between hands trembling with hunger. And here lies the great paradox of the medieval kitchen. The paradox that makes it so symbolic, that its very invisibility is what gives it power. For though it was unrecorded, unglorified, unpraised, it was the ground upon which glory was built, the silence beneath which song resounded, the darkness from which light drew its strength. And in this paradox we see how the rhythm of the kitchen mirrors the rhythm of life itself. Where what is hidden sustains what is seen, where what is unspoken sustains what is sung, where what is forgotten sustains what is remembered. Bread and body, bread and Christ, bread and hunger. The chant we have carried through returns here, steady as prayer, steady as heartbeat, reminding us that bread was not only food but symbol, not only sustenance but sacrament, not only crust and crumb but body and blood. And so every loaf lifted from the oven, every crust torn in shadows, echoed a deeper truth. That the servant's hunger was bound to the noble's feast, that the humble kitchen was bound to the radiant hall, that body and bread and Christ and hunger were bound together in a rhythm older than castles and older than kings. Fire, too, was symbol, fire that burned in hearths, not only as destroyer, but as transformer, fire that purged, fire that purified, fire that demanded offering. The spit boy's arm blistered as sacrifice, the scullion's lungs choked as penance, the bread rising as resurrection, the meat roasting as immolation. And so in the pulse of the kitchen we glimpse a spiritual echo, faint but insistent, that to labor here was to enter into a form of liturgy, though it was unacknowledged, though no priest officiated, though no altar stood. And yet the kitchen itself was altar, the fire itself was chalice, the bread itself was host, the salt itself was offering, the ale itself was liquid bread, sustaining the weary, dulling the ache, numbing them into endurance. And salt too was paradox, purity and preservation, yet also currency, wages measured in grains, salary derived from salt. And so even the elements of labor, the things taken for granted, bread, fire, ale, salt, carried symbolic weight, spiritual undertones, liturgical shadows. And when we speak of pulse, we must also speak of time. For the kitchen's rhythm was not only daily, but eternal, a cycle folding upon itself. Dawn into dusk, fire into ash, ash into dawn again, until time itself felt less like progression and more like breath, more like chant, more like heartbeat. And so the servant did not count years, did not reckon in festivals, did not measure life by noble lineage, but by the rhythm of the kitchen, smoke at dawn, fire at noon, ash at dusk, hunger always. And this rhythm was as much a binding as any oath, more binding than fealty, for it tied body to labor, labor to survival, survival to hunger, hunger to bread, bread to Christ, Christ to body again, in an endless litany. And in this litany, this repetition, this chant, lies the meditative closure we must now reach, for we must slow the rhythm, soften the sound, dim the flame. As the kitchen dims at night, as the hearth exhales its last smoke, as the servants crawl back to straw, as silence gathers in the corridors, and what remains is not clatter or fire, not song or laughter, but only breath, faint yet steady, the invisible pulse, the heartbeat of the castle, still echoing in the stones, though no one above hears it. No one above marks it, no one above remembers, and yet it is there, and it will return at dawn, and it will continue long after a feast has ended, long after a lord has died, long after the castle itself has crumbled, because the rhythm of the kitchen is older than this place, older than any single hall, older than the names recorded in chronicles, because it is the rhythm of labor, of survival, of hunger, of bread and fire and salt, of body sustained by body, of invisible pulse sustaining visible splendor. And so we close, not with silence empty, but silence full, silence resonant, silence in which the echo of the heartbeat can still be heard if one listens, faint yet steady, the pulse of the kitchen, the unseen foundation, the hidden heart, beating, 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 until even words fall away and only rhythm remains. When I was young, my grandmother taught me how to make tortillas the old ways, she said, not the quick and easy recipe that my mother had taught me, the one with the store-bought masa harina and the stand mixer, but the real thing, the one we used in Oaxaca, the one my mother learned from her grandmother, and so on back. First, you have to get the right corn. Not just any corn will do. We need a corn that is nixtamalized, cooked in an alkaline solution, treated in such a way that the hull comes off easily and the grain can be ground into a dough. Then comes the heart of the matter, the stone. We're going to use a metate, a traditional Mexican grinding stone, one that has probably been used for generations. My grandmother kept hers outside behind the house, tucked into the corner beside some other stones and an old clay pot. She would take it up every morning, rest it on the flat part of the wall, then start to grind. The kernels of corn were put into a special pouch made from the skin of an agave plant. We call it a meneatoy, and I remember vividly the feel of the rough agave fibers, the smell of the corn, the sound of the grinding, the metate making a soft sucking noise as it ate the corn, bit by bit, kernel by kernel. And all the while, my grandmother hummed a low tune that went with the motion of her hands and the movements of the metate. The dough began to form, little by little. It was a very slow process, and my grandmother, patient and strong, worked until her hands were sore and bleeding. Finally, when the dough was ready, she put it into a huge bowl. Then we went inside the house, and she started to work her magic. Now, with the dough on the comal, it was ready to be cooked. First, we rolled out the dough into thin sheets, so thin that almost translucent, and then we wrapped the pieces around small, round pebbles. This took a lot of dexterity. We didn't want the pebbles to fall out. Then came the final touch. Using a simple earthenware pot, my grandmother would gently pat the pebbles to flatten them. They now looked like miniature tortillas. Next, she carefully peeled away the dough so that only the pebble remained in its crispy shell. And then, finally, we put these miniature tortillas into the comal. One by one, they puffed up like little clouds. My grandmother took them out, put a little beans, salsa, cheese, and flowers on top, then rolled them up and showed me how to eat them with my hands. That day, I learned much more than the old ways of making tortillas. I learned that food is more than sustenance. Food is a story. It's a connection to our past, a dialogue with our ancestors, a way of keeping our traditions alive. It was an honor to participate in this age-old practice, and as I watched my grandmother work, I saw in her the strength and wisdom of generations of women who had done the same thing before her. And I knew that when I shared this knowledge with others, I was also sharing a piece of my heritage. Welcome to this channel. Today we are going to learn about the metate, an ancient tool that is still used today to make tortillas. You may be asking yourself, why is this stone so important? The matiti is a tool that connects us to our ancestors and allows us to keep our traditions alive. Let's dive in. The matiti is a flat, grinding stone that is used to make tortillas. It's typically made from a hard, durable material such as basalt or granite and has a rough, textured surface that is used to grind corn into a fine dough called masa, which is the main ingredient in tortillas. The metate is a simple yet ingenious invention that has been used for thousands of years. It's a crucial tool in the preparation of tortillas, which are a staple food in many cultures. The process of making tortillas on a metate requires skill and patience, but the result is a fresh, delicious product that is well worth the effort. The history of the metate can be traced back thousands of years to the ancient civilizations of Mesoamerica. It's believed that the metate was invented sometime before 2000 BCE, and it remained an essential tool for many centuries. The Aztecs, Maya, and other indigenous peoples of Mesoamerica relied on the metate to produce the masa that they used to make tortillas. The metate is believed to have been brought to the Philippines by Spanish colonizers in the 16th century, and it quickly became an important tool in the local cuisine. In the Philippines, the metate is known as the salitranco, or the pilin, and is used to make a variety of dishes, including rice paper and coconut candy. Today, the metate continues to be used in many parts of Latin America and the Philippines. It's a cherished tool that represents a rich cultural heritage and a connection to the past. Many families have their own traditional meditates that have been passed down through generations, and each one tells a story of its own. The process of making tortillas on a metate is a labor-intensive process that requires skill and patience. The corn kernels are first soaked and then ground on the metate using a wooden roller called a mano. The dough is then kneaded and rested before being rolled out into thin sheets and cooked on a hot griddle called a comal. The entire process takes several hours and requires a lot of physical effort, but the result is a fresh, delicious product that is well worth the effort. Making tortillas on a metate is not just a practical necessity, it's also a cultural tradition that has been passed down through generations. It's a way of preserving the heritage and identity of indigenous communities and ensuring that their traditions continue to thrive. As I watched my grandmother work the dough, I couldn't help but wonder about the history of this simple tool. Where did the metate come from? How has it evolved over time? And what does it symbolize in the context of my grandmother's life and culture? These questions led me on a journey of discovery that took me back centuries to the ancient civilizations of Mesoamerica. What I found was a rich and fascinating history that dates back thousands of years. The metate is an ancient tool that has been used for millennia. It's a testament to the ingenuity and resourcefulness of our ancestors who developed such an efficient and effective way to process corn. The history of the metate is closely intertwined with the history of corn itself. Corn is believed to have been domesticated in Mexico around 9,000 years ago, and it quickly became an essential part of the diet for indigenous peoples. The metate was developed sometime before 2000 BCE, and it quickly became an indispensable tool for grinding corn into a usable flour. The Aztecs, Maya, and other indigenous peoples of Mesoamerica relied on the matate to produce the masa that they used to make tortillas. Tortillas are a type of unleavened flatbread that is made from masa, which is a dough-like substance that is made from ground corn. Tortillas are an important source of carbohydrates and are a staple of the diet in many cultures around the world. They are often served with beans, meat, cheese, or other toppings, and are eaten for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. The metate played a central role in the lives of the indigenous peoples of Mesoamerica. It was not just a tool for making tortillas, it was a symbol of community and cultural identity. The act of grinding corn on a metate was a communal activity that brought people together and strengthened bonds within the community. It was also a way of preserving cultural traditions and passing down knowledge from one generation to the next. Today, the metate continues to be used in many parts of Latin America and the Philippines. It's a cherished tool that represents a rich cultural heritage and a connection to the past. Many families have their own traditional metatas that have been passed down through generations. Each metata has its own unique history and stories to tell. The metate is more than just a tool. It's a symbol of resilience, adaptation, and cultural continuity. It's a reminder of the ingenuity and resourcefulness of our ancestors and their ability to thrive in spite of adversity. It's also a symbol of the power of community and the importance of cultural traditions. As I reflect on my grandmother's story and the history of the metate, I am filled with a sense of pride and gratitude. Pride in the heritage that has been passed down to me, and gratitude for the generations of women who have used the metate to feed their families and communities. The metard is a powerful symbol of our collective history and a reminder of the importance of preserving cultural traditions. It's a legacy that we can all be proud of, and one that should be celebrated. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. If you haven't seen it yet, click here to see a video about camal, another essential tool in making tortillas. Thanks for watching. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring. So I was doing some thinking today while I was making some tortillas, and I realized something about my family. We're kind of boring. I mean, compared to many other families, our traditions aren't particularly colorful. We don't tell spooky ghost stories around Halloween or go crazy for Christmas carols. And while my mom makes a killer sweet potato casserole, I'm pretty sure that dish has never actually appeared on the table on Thanksgiving. At least not on purpose. But we do have our traditions, things that make our family special and give our lives meaning and texture, like our Sunday night spaghetti dinners and my dad's annual tradition of buying me horribly ugly but gloriously comfortable Christmas sweaters. Those things weave together the fabric of our lives. They give us the confidence to face whatever weird, scary, wonderful thing comes next, because we know we'll get through it together. And one of those rituals is tied up in a humble piece of equipment that you probably have in your kitchen, the tortilla press. Now, I'm gonna be honest, I don't really love making tortillas. Like, getting the dough just right can be kind of annoying, and it takes way longer to make them by hand than the store-bought stuff. But that's exactly why I think they're such a perfect metaphor for faith. Because even though it's annoying and time-consuming and sometimes downright painful, like when you accidentally drop a ball of dough on your foot, we keep doing it. We keep returning to these imperfect, laborious traditions because they give our lives shape. They remind us who we are and who we want to be. The reality is that most of us live in a world that doesn't much care about ancient ways of doing things. But every week, every month, maybe every day, we return to these things that tie us to our past, to our history, to our family, to our friends. These acts of worship don't change the world. They don't bend the future to our desires. They don't grant us power over those who hold different traditions dear. But they remind us of what is beautiful, remind us of what matters, remind us of who we are and who we want to be. In many ways, traditions are born out of necessity. Making tortillas, for example, came about because people figured out that if they took a starchy underground tuber and ground it up and slapped it on a hot rock, eventually, after a lot of trial and error, they could make something vaguely edible. And then people noticed that if they left that vaguely edible thing out in the sun long enough, it would somehow turn into something a lot less vaguely edible. And the rest, as they say, is history. But tortillas didn't just change the course of human history. For centuries, my ancestors ground maize by hand, making corn into flour, turning nourishment into sustenance, and then carefully crafting that sustenance into the very fabric of their lives. They were making more than just food. They were making community. They were making identity. They were making legacy. When I think of all the ancestors who stood in that very kitchen before me, grinding the very same ingredients with the very same tools, I feel connected to them in a way that nothing else ever could replicate. Their hands may have been stronger, their backs more stooped, their faces lined with a lifetime of laughter and struggle. But their hearts, they were the same as mine, beating with the same hopes and dreams, facing the same fears and uncertainties, all while kneading the same dough and grinding the same corn. As the women ground the maize, they weren't just making tortillas, they were making community, they were making identity, they were making legacy. When I eat a tortilla, I'm tasting the echoes of all those generations who came before me. I'm tasting their sweat and their prayers and their stories. And I'm reminded of the resilience of my ancestors, of their ability to find beauty and meaning even in the most difficult of circumstances. Many times throughout my life, I've found myself drifting away from the things that mattered most, the things that grounded me, the things that made me who I am. And every time I do that, I lose a part of myself. I forget where I come from. I forget what I believe in. I forget what gives my life meaning. So when I return to the simple act of making tortillas, I'm not just making food. I'm reconnecting with my heritage. I'm reconnecting with my soul. I'm reconnecting with the strength and wisdom and love of the women who came before me. But that's not all. When I share this practice with others, when I teach my kids and grandkids how to make tortillas, I'm passing on more than just a skill. I'm passing on a legacy. I'm passing on a story. I'm passing on a piece of my heart. Because when we gather around the tortilla press, we're not just making tortillas, we're making memories. We're making bonds that will last a lifetime. We're making connections to something larger than ourselves. We're making sense of the world and our place in it. I recently had the opportunity to travel to Mexico and spend some time on a family farm outside of Oaxaca. While I was there, I got to see firsthand the process of making tortillas, and it was amazing. There's something so special about seeing the whole process from start to finish, from planting the seeds to harvesting the corn to grinding the tortillas. I also got to try different kinds of tortillas, like the ones made with blue corn and the ones made with nopal, the cactus, and they were delicious. But they were more than just delicious. They were a taste of history, a taste of my heritage, a taste of home. I realized that I had never really appreciated the true meaning of tortillas until I had experienced the whole process myself. It was so much more than just a food. It was a way of life, a way of connecting to the land, to the community, to the ancestors. It was a way of honoring the gifts of nature, the hard work of the farmers, the creativity of the cooks. It was a way of celebrating life, death, love, family, faith. Today, the ritual of making tortillas is still alive and well in many Mexican homes, including my own. Every Sunday, I get to watch my mom make her famous tortillas, which are legendary among my siblings and me. I also get to watch my wife and kids make tortillas whenever we have extra time, and it brings me so much joy to see them laughing and playing in the kitchen, making memories around the tortilla press. It makes me proud to know that this tradition will continue to live on for generations to come. You don't have to be Mexican or Catholic or even a believer in any particular faith tradition to appreciate the beauty and power of this practice. You just have to be willing to take a little bit of time each day to do something that matters to you, something that connects you to the people and places that matter to you, something that helps you make sense of the world and your place in it. Because the truth is that we all need something like tortillas in our lives, something that grounds us, something that nourishes us, something that sustains us through the ups and downs, the joys and sorrows, the triumphs and struggles of this crazy, messy, beautiful thing called life. Because the truth is that life is hard, life is messy, life is complicated, life is often painful, and sometimes it feels like everything is falling apart. But when we have something like tortillas to come back to, something to anchor us to the present moment, something to connect us to the people we love, something to remind us of what really matters, well, that gives us the strength to keep going, that gives us the courage to face whatever comes our way. We have the strength to keep going because we know we're not alone. We know we're part of something bigger than ourselves. We know we're part of a story that began long before us and will continue long after we're gone. And we know that no matter what happens, we have each other. We have our heritage. We have our traditions. We have our tortillas. This piece of writing is brought to you by our community of supporters. If you would like to support us, visit our website. It seems eternal, though it sits in the heart of the home with the weight of something that will never move, never falter, never age. The matete is mortal, not in the way of flesh or flame, not in the quick perishing of flowers or food, but in the slow, unrelenting way of wind on mountain, river on stone, breath upon breath, hand upon hand. Over years, over decades, over generations, the hollow deepens. The surface, once flat, smooth where it has been touched 1,000 times, rough only at the edges where the stone still remembers its birth in the quarry. Each pass of the mano, each circle of grinding, wears the metate down. It is imperceptible in a day, invisible in a year, and yet, over a lifetime, the stone's body tells the story of every kernel crushed, every meal made, every life sustained. The matar holds memory, not in words, but in form, not in stories told aloud, but in the shape of its own erosion. And in that shape lives a paradox. Stone is the symbol of permanence. It is heavy, unmoving, unyielding. It holds houses upright, marks graves, outlasts flesh. Yet here, in the center of the home, is a stone that changes, a stone that bends under use, a stone that remembers through its own undoing. It does not resist this erosion, it invites it, welcomes the wearing down as a kind of offering, a kind of intimacy. To be worn is to have been useful. To be thinned is to have fed. To be grooved is to have lived. The médité does not fear its mortality, because it knows that in each grain ground a life was sustained, a hunger was quieted, a child was lulled to sleep. The loss of its surface is the gain of 1,000 meals, 1,000 breaths, 1,000 mornings. The médité is not only a tool, it is a witness. It has heard the first cries of newborns laid near the hearth, the weeping of women whose husbands never returned from war, the laughter of children sneaking pinches of dough, the soft lullabies sung by grandmothers as they rocked and ground. It has heard arguments whispered under breath, secrets confessed in the quiet of early dawn, the hum of prayers chanted as tortillas puffed and browned. It has heard silence, to not the empty kind, but the silence of togetherness, of knowing without speaking, of grief too deep for sound. All of it has passed through the air above the stone, and the stone has absorbed it, not audibly, not visibly, but in the way its hollow deepened, in the way its surface changed. It is a silent archive of human life. What has the médité seen? It has seen the hands of a young woman become the hands of a mother, then the hands of a grandmother, the skin wrinkling, the grip weakening, the rhythm slowing but never stopping. It has seen maize turn from green to gold, seasons pass from dry to wet, rains fall and rivers swell. It has seen feasts and famines, births and burials, weddings and wakes. It has seen a child learn to grind and then teach another, the circle of life turning as surely as the circle of stone. It has seen hunger stretch long into night, seen hope flicker in the glow of the hearth, seen joy rise like steam from fresh tortillas. It has seen everything that makes a life: labor, love, loss, longing. The groove in its center is not unlike a wrinkle on a face, not unlike a riverbed carved into land. It is the map of time itself, etched not in ink or paint, but in pressure, in repetition, in care. Each millimeter of depth is a story. Each smooth arc is a memory. The hollow is not emptiness, it is fullness. It is the accumulation of every moment spent in service, every act of care, every grain of maize transformed into sustenance. It is memory made tangible. It is history shaped by hands. There is a kind of poetry in the way stone wears down. It does not crumble all at once. It does not shatter under pressure. It yields slowly, gently, willingly, like a mother who bends to lift her child, like a river that curves around a stone, like a song that softens at its end. It gives itself over not to destruction, but to transformation. And in that transformation is beauty, is meaning, is legacy. The médité is an altar. This offering, these hands, these grains, this life. It is an altar without images, without rituals, without prayers. It is simply there, and you are there, bringing your gifts, giving your devotion, receiving in return the sustenance to keep going. You are part of a lineage of women, of men, who have done this work before you, just as you will teach this work to those who come after. You are a link in a chain spanning generations. This tool, this earth, this seed, they connect you to those who came before and to those who will follow. The matat is a silent teacher. It demands no praise, offers no reward. It simply waits, steady and strong, as you do your part to keep the world turning. And so the daughter kneels. She kneels because her mother knelt, because her grandmother knelt, because she knows that one day her daughter will kneel, and in that kneeling, in that repetition, they are one. They are linked, unbroken, continuous. In today's episode, we explore the profound symbolism of the metate in indigenous cultures, particularly among the Hopi people. The metate is more than just a grinding stone. It's a conduit of history, a vessel of ancestral wisdom, and a silent witness to the continuity of life. Join us as we delve into the rich cultural significance of the metate and uncover the stories it holds within its ancient heart. Now, the metate is never truly owned by one pair of hands. It belongs instead to a line, to a sequence, to a rhythm that stretches across time. A grandmother bends over it in the dim light of dawn, her back curved, her hair silvered, her breath slow and steady. She does not think of herself as owner, but as caretaker, as one who holds the stone in trust until it must pass on. For when she dies, the metate will not be buried with her. It will not be cast aside. It will remain, waiting for another pair of hands, another breath, another body to kneel before it. And so it is passed, grandmother to mother, mother to daughter, daughter to child not yet grown. A transfer more enduring than clothing, more permanent than jewelry, more sacred than anything made of metal or thread. Fabric, frays, beads, scatter, gold tarnishes, but the stone endures. The act of inheritance is not always grand, not always ceremonial. Sometimes it is simple. A woman dies, and her daughter kneels the next morning in her place, because the maize must still be ground, because life must continue. The rhythm does not pause for grief. Forward and back, the stone insists. And so the daughter takes her mother's place, not by choice, not by announcement, but by necessity. Other times, the passing is more visible, more intimate. A mother, old and frail, lays her hand on her daughter's shoulder, guiding the motion one last time. She whispers, "This is how you press, this is how you breathe. This is how you give the stone your strength and let it return to you what you need." The daughter nods, and with tears in her eyes, she repeats the rhythm, forward and back, forward and back. When the mother dies, the daughter kneels again, not only out of duty, but out of love, out of memory. Each motion is a way of keeping her mother alive. Each meal is an act of remembrance. The metate becomes more than a tool. It becomes a symbol of lineage, a stone heart beating across generations. The rhythm of grinding is not only the rhythm of daily life, it is the rhythm of ancestry itself. With each repetition, the daughter echoes the movements of her mother, who echoed her grandmother, who echoed those who came before. The metate is a silent teacher, its surface bearing the imprints of countless lessons. Each scar, each groove tells a story of hands that have come before, of meals that have nourished, of tortillas that have sustained. The patterns etched into the stone become a kind of braille for the hands, a tactile history that guides the young as they learn the sacred craft of grinding. More than just a tool, the metate is a repository of ancestral knowledge, its surface a map of generations past. But what is this inheritance? What is received when a Hopi woman inherits the metate from her mother or grandmother? Is it simply a household task, a duty passed down through generations? Or is there something more profound, something spiritual at play here. To understand this inheritance, we must first understand the Hopi concept of time. Time for the Hopi is not linear, moving from past to future. Instead, it is cyclical, a continuous loop in which the past, present, and future are all intertwined. This view of time is reflected in the Hopi creation story, which tells of a time before time when the world was in balance and harmony. This mythical past is not a distant memory, but a living reality that informs the present. The Hopi people believe that they are living in this mythical time, and their actions in the present can influence the balance of the world and shape the future. The matati is an important part of this cyclical view of time. It is a tangible link to the past, a physical object that has been used for generations to grind corn and make tortillas, the staple of the Hopi diet. When a young girl is taught how to use the metate, she is not just learning a practical skill. She is also connecting herself to the long line of Hopi women who have ground corn on that very same stone. The metate is a silent witness to the continuity of Hopi culture and identity. This inheritance is a reminder of the interconnectedness of all things. Everything in the universe is related, and everything affects everything else. The actions of the individual affect the community and the health of the entire world. This understanding shapes Hopi religion, which is deeply rooted in the rhythms and cycles of nature. This inheritance is a responsibility, a duty to continue the traditions and customs of the Hopi people. It is a commitment to the well-being of the community and the preservation of their cultural heritage. Finally, this inheritance is a source of strength and resilience. Despite the challenges they have faced, the Hopi people have survived and thrived for centuries. They have endured drought, war, and the encroachment of modern society. Yet they have persevered, drawing strength from their connection to the land, their cultural traditions, and the wisdom of their ancestors. The metate is a symbol of this strength, a reminder that the Hopi, the Paiol people have the power to shape their own destiny and create a better future for themselves and their children. This inheritance is a complex and challenging one, but it is also a great honor. To be chosen to inherit the metate is to be entrusted with the most sacred duty in Hopi society. To be a link in the chain of tradition that connects the past, present, and future. It is a role that requires dedication, sacrifice, and a deep commitment to one's culture and community. But for the Hopi women who have inherited the metate, it is a privilege and a joy to carry on the traditions of their ancestors and ensure the survival of their culture for generations to come. And so the daughter kneels. She kneels because her mother knelt, because her grandmother knelt, because she knows that one day her daughter will kneel. And in that kneeling, in that repetition, they are one. They are linked, unbroken, continuous. The metate binds her as much as it blesses her. It is cradle and grave, womb and burden, gift and chain, and still she kneels. She kneels because her grandmother knelt, because her mother knelt, because she knows that one day her daughter will kneel, and in that kneeling, in that repetition, they are one. They are linked, unbroken, continuous. The metate binds her as much as it blesses her. It is cradle and grave, womb and burden, gift and chain, and still she kneels. There is a moment, and it's not a sudden moment. It's a slow moment that comes at the end of a meditate's life. It comes as the stone thins, as the grooves deepen until they no longer hold the grain, as the edges chip and crumble, and the family that has leaned upon it for decades sees the change, feels it in the grind. The kernels no longer yield flour so finely, the motion no longer flows so smoothly. And then one morning the stone simply cannot carry the work any longer. The tool that once outlasted generations has finally reached its end. Yet a metate is never discarded. To cast it away would be unthinkable, as if casting away an ancestor, as if throwing aside years of labor and love. Instead, it is retired with reverence. This is a story from the Maya, and stories like this don't just entertain, they preserve knowledge, values, and history. And today, we're going to look at the story of the retired metate, a story that whispers profound truths about life, death, and the enduring spirit of community. So let us delve into the narrative and explore the deeper layers that make this tale so much more than just a story. Let's start with a little background. A metate is a traditional Mesoamerican handheld stone for grinding corn. It's more than just a tool. It's a silent partner in the creation of tortillas, the very foundation of Maya cuisine, passed down through generations. Each metate carries within it the echoes of countless meals, the warmth of countless firesides. It's a witness to family life, a participant in rituals and ceremonies. So when the metate wears down or breaks, it's not just a tool that's lost. It's a part of the family's history that's changed form. Our story opens with the reality that the end of a metate's life is not a sudden event, but a slow, steady process. The stone doesn't break all at once, but gradually wears down over time. Its edges become chipped, its surface roughened. This mirroring of nature's cycles teaches us about patience and the acceptance of slow change. Life, like the metate, changes imperceptibly at first, and then with clarity. As the stone's decline continues, the family notices. They feel the change in the texture of the flour they produce, the sound of the grinding, and perhaps most significantly, the diminished connection to their past. The metate is more than a tool. It's a repository of memories and traditions. Its weakening signals not just the need for a new tool, but the dawning realization of a shifting family dynamic. The approaching loss. Eventually, the metate reaches a point where it can no longer serve its purpose. It's worn out, unable to bear the weight of its task. This moment, the breaking or retirement of the metate, signifies a significant shift in the story. It's a clear sign that things will never be the same. It's the end of an era and the beginning of adaptation. But even in this moment of apparent loss, our story points towards a deeper truth. The Maya, like many indigenous cultures, had a profound understanding of the cyclical nature of life. They saw death not as an ending, but as a transition, a necessary phase in the continuous flow of existence. This belief system is reflected beautifully in the story of the metate. When the metate can no longer grind maize, it's not thrown away, abandoned, or left to waste. Rather, it's retired with respect and dignity. Depending on the circumstances and the family's traditions, the metate might be buried under the floor of the home, becoming part of the very structure it served for so long. Or it might be broken into smaller pieces and those fragments placed near the hearth, silently watching over the family's gatherings as they did for generations. Sometimes the metate is left standing against the wall, not used, but still present, a silent, aged member of the family. In each case, the metate is remembered, honored, and its absence is acknowledged. The Maya understood that everything in the universe goes through cycles, everything changes, and the relationship between humans and their tools is no exception. But this did not mean that the end of the Metate's active life meant its disappearance from the family's lives. On the contrary, the Metate remained woven into the fabric of the household, even in its retirement. Let's take a closer look at how the Maya approached this process of retiring a Metate. The method varied across families and regions, each adding its unique customs and beliefs. But there was always a sense of reverence, a deep respect for the years of service and companionship the Metate had provided. The act of burying a Metate under the home's floor was more than just a disposal method. It was a ritual, a way of giving back to the earth from which the stone had originally been taken, and to the ancestors whose spirits were believed to dwell within the home. The placement of the fragments by the hearth spoke of the Metate's continued presence, its spirit watching over the family as they shared meals and stories around the fire. Leaving the Metate standing against the wall was a gesture of deep respect, a silent acknowledgement of the stone's enduring presence in their lives. Each of these acts was a testament to the Maya's deep connection to their tools, their environment, and their heritage. They recognized that every part of their lives, including the disposal of a worn-out tool, was an opportunity to express their beliefs and values. But the significance of the retired Metate went beyond just being a silent observer. It was a living memory, a tangible link to the past that helped keep their traditions alive. The younger members of the household would have grown up with stories of the Metate, hearing tales of its past use, its importance to their family, and the respect it deserved. The sight of the retired Metate, whether buried, fragmented, or standing alone, would have served as a constant reminder of these stories, ensuring that the family's history wasn't forgotten. In this way, the Metate became a storyteller, whispering tales of the past to those who listened. The story of the retired Metate is not just about the end of one object's life. It reflects a profound truth about the interconnectedness of all things in the natural world, the cyclical nature of life, and the deep respect the Maya had for their tools and their heritage. It's a story that invites us to see the world through their eyes, to appreciate the wisdom embedded in their traditions, and to consider the legacy of the objects that have silently shaped our lives. The Metate is more than just a stone. It's a silent partner in the creation of life, a participant in family life, a repository of memories, a conduit to the past, and ultimately a symbol of resilience and renewal.